Hello and welcome. I know many of you use these videos to help you fall asleep. So before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also comment where you're from and at what time you're watching. Take a moment to get comfortable, relax, and let yourself unwind. Name of the story: The Lantern on the Old Trail. The old forest was quiet. Too quiet. Ranger Ben Carter walked the familiar path. His boots crunched on dry leaves. The sun was setting fast. Long shadows reached for him like dark fingers. He was almost done with his patrol. Then he could go back to his warm cabin. He was thinking about his dinner when he saw it. A soft, golden light flickering between the trees. It was not a flashlight. It was not a campfire. It looked like an old lantern. Ben stopped. He frowned. Nobody should be out here. The trails were closed at dusk. He called out. His voice was swallowed by the thick woods. Ben said, "Hello? Is someone out there?" There was no answer. Only the sound of the wind in the pine needles. The light moved. It swayed gently. It looked like someone was carrying it. They were heading deeper into the woods, away from the marked trail. Ben felt a cold knot in his stomach. This was wrong, but he was a ranger. It was his job to help. He had to make sure no one was lost. Ben said, "Hey, stop. The trail is the other way." The light did not stop. It floated further into the darkness. Ben sighed. He grabbed his radio. He pressed the button. Static hissed back at him. He tried again. Nothing. The mountains always played tricks with the signal. He looked at the fading sunset. He looked at the lonely light. He made a choice. He would just go tell them to turn back. It would only take a minute. He left the path and stepped into the deep forest. The air grew cold. The light moved ahead of him. It was always the same distance away. He walked faster. The light moved faster. He started to jog. The light began to glide. It weaved between trees he knew were not there. The land was wrong. The trees were too close. The ground was too soft. He stopped to catch his breath. He looked back. The path was gone. There was only darkness behind him. The lantern light waited. It seemed to pulse. It was waiting for him. A whisper rode on the wind. It was not a word. It was a feeling to follow. Ben felt a deep fear. This was not right. He turned to go back. A branch snapped loudly behind him. He spun around. The lantern light was closer now. Much closer. He could see its shape. It was an old railroad lantern, rusty and glass. But there was no flame inside. It was a cold, dead light, and it hung in the air all by itself. The lantern drifted slowly to his left. It hovered near a giant oak tree. Then it began to fade. The light got dimmer and dimmer. Ben watched, his heart pounding. He did not understand. The light was vanishing. Soon he would be alone in the dark. A terrible thought came to him. He did not know where he was. The radio was dead. He was lost. He took a step toward where the light had been. He had to see. Maybe it was a trick. His foot hit something metal. He looked down. There, half buried in leaves and mud, was a rusted piece of iron. It was a railroad spike. He knelt down and picked it up. It was old and cold. He looked up again. The lantern was completely gone. But now, where it had hung, he saw something else. A faint path. It was overgrown with weeds and moss. But it was there. It was not a hiking trail. It was too straight, too narrow. It was an old railroad bed. Ben stood there, holding the spike. He knew the history of these woods. There hadn't been a train through here in over 100 years. The tracks were all torn up. Gone. This path should not exist. A sound made him jump. It was a low, distant whistle. A train whistle. It was impossible. The sound was thin and sad. It came from far down the old railroad bed. He dropped the spike. He had to get back. He turned around, trying to find his own footprints. But the ground was hard. There were no marks. The forest behind him was a wall of black. The train whistle blew again. It was a little closer this time. It was not a welcome sound. It was a lonely sound. A lost sound. He felt a pull. A need to walk down that old, dead track. To see where it went. He fought the feeling. This was how people vanished. They followed strange lights and sounds. He decided to walk in a straight line. He would go back the way he came. He was sure of it. He walked for 10 minutes. His flashlight beam cut through the dark. He saw the same trees, the same rocks. He was not getting anywhere. Then he saw it again, the golden lantern light. It was ahead of him, floating just above the ground. It had returned. It bobbed once, like it was nodding to him. Then it started moving down the old railroad path. Away from him. Ben felt a chill that was not from the cold. The light was not leading him back. It was leading him deeper in. He stood frozen. He could not follow that thing. It was not safe. He heard a new sound. A soft crying. It was a child sobbing. It came from the darkness behind him, from the direction he thought was back to safety. The crying was small and scared. It sounded so real. Ben called out, his voice shaky. Ben said, "Hello? Who's there? Are you hurt?" The crying stopped for a second. Then it started again. It was further away now. It was moving toward the old railroad path. The lantern light waited up ahead. It seemed to brighten. Ben's mind raced. What if a kid was really lost out here? What if they were following the light too? He couldn't just leave them. He had to check. It was his job. He took a step toward the crying sound, then another. He was going away from his cabin, away from safety. He was following the sound. The crying led him right to the old railroad path. The lantern light glowed softly, lighting the way forward. The crying sound was now coming from further down the track. It was leading him on. Ben followed. He had no choice now. He was completely lost. The only thing he had was this path. The trees leaned in close. Their branches looked like claws in the dark. The lantern light moved at a steady pace. It never got closer. It never went farther. It just led. After a long time of walking, the crying faded away. It just stopped. Ben was alone again with the light. He felt more alone than ever before. The path began to change. The air grew damp and cold. He heard water dripping. He saw thick moss covering everything. The trees were different here. They were older. Their trunks were twisted. He was in a part of the forest he had never seen before. This was not on any map. The lantern light drifted onward. It led him to the edge of a black, still lake. The water was like a sheet of dark glass. The light did not go around the lake. It went onto the lake. It hovered a few inches above the water. It was waiting for him again. Ben stood on the muddy shore. He could not go out there. It was water. He would fall in. The light pulsed gently. It seemed to promise it was safe. From the far side of the lake, the train whistle blew again. It was clearer now. He could almost feel the vibration. The child's crying started again too. It was coming from the middle of the lake. It sounded like they were in the water. Ben's heart ached. He thought of a kid, cold and scared in the black water. He had to help. He had to try. He took a hesitant step onto the lake. His boot did not sink. It found something solid just beneath the surface. It was a wooden plank. He pushed on it. It felt strong. He took another step. Another plank. It was an old, sunken bridge. The lantern light moved slowly, showing him the way across the hidden path. He walked on the water, following the ghostly glow. The planks were slippery. They creaked under his weight. One wrong step, and he would plunge into the deep, cold lake. Halfway across, he looked back. The shore was gone. Lost in a thick, rising fog. There was only forward. The crying in the water had stopped. The only sound was his own breathing and the gentle lapping of water on wood. He finally reached the other side. His feet found solid ground. The lantern light did not stop. It moved into a tunnel made of weeping willow trees. Their branches hung down like a curtain. Ben pushed through them. The branches felt like cold, thin fingers on his face. On the other side, the world was wrong. The colors were faded. The air smelled of wet metal and old ashes. He was in a clearing. In the middle stood an old train station. It was made of rotten wood. Its windows were broken. The sign was faded, but he could read it. Willow Creek Crossing. This station had burned down a century ago. It wasn't here. It couldn't be here. The lantern light floated to the center of the platform and stopped. It hung there, silent and still. Ben walked closer, drawn to it. He had to know. He had to understand. He stepped onto the creaking platform. The lantern's light began to change. The warm gold turned to a sickly, pale green. It flickered, and for a moment he saw a face in the light. It was a man's face, stretched in a silent scream. Then it was gone. The green light grew brighter, illuminating the whole station. Ben saw them then. Shadows. Dozens of them. They stood on the platform. They were pale and see-through. They were all looking at him. Their eyes were empty. They were waiting for a train that would never come. The train whistle screamed, right next to him now, loud and piercing. The ground shook. A cold wind blew. Ben knew. This was not a rescue. He was not leading anyone to safety. He was the lost one, and he had just joined them. The lantern's light went out. The world snapped back into silence, but it was a different silence now. It was heavy and full of whispers he could almost hear. The ghostly passengers on the platform did not move. They just stared with their hollow eyes. Ben stood frozen on the creaking boards. He was too scared to breathe. The green light from the lantern was gone, but a faint glow remained. It came from the ghosts themselves. They shimmered in the dark. Ben slowly turned his head. He looked at the tracks. They were rusty and broken. Weeds grew between the ties. This place was dead. A sudden noise made him jump. It was the sound of a door opening. The door to the station master's office swung inward with a loud, painful squeal. The inside was blacker than the night. The staring ghosts all turned their heads toward the open door. It was an invitation. Ben did not want to go in. He took a step back. The wooden platform groaned under his foot. All the ghostly heads turned back to look at him, their empty eyes fixed on him. He felt a pressure in his mind. It was not a voice. It was a command. Go inside. He tried to resist. His legs would not listen. They moved on their own. One step, then another. He walked toward the dark doorway. He felt the cold from the ghosts as he passed them. It was the cold of deep winter. He stepped through the door. The office was small. It was filled with the smell of dust and old paper. A single chair sat behind a dusty desk. On the desk was a visitor logbook. It was open. An old pen lay next to it. The door slammed shut behind him. Ben spun around. He was alone in the room. But he was not alone. He felt a presence. It was in the corner of the room, a shadow darker than all the others. It moved. It stepped forward. It was the shape of a man in an old-fashioned railroad uniform. The man's face was in shadow, but Ben could see his hands. They were burned black. The shadow man pointed a bony finger at the logbook on the desk. Ben understood. He had to sign it. He did not want to. He shook his head. Ben said, "No, I won't. Let me go." The shadow man did not move. The pressure in Ben's head returned. It was stronger now. It felt like a headache behind his eyes. He saw a quick image in his mind. His own face, pale and empty, standing on the platform with the others, waiting forever. He gasped. He picked up the pen. It was ice cold. He looked at the logbook. The page was full of names. The last entry was from 1912. The handwriting was messy and faded. He put the pen to the paper. He wrote his name, Benjamin Carter. The ink looked black at first. Then it turned a rusty, blood-red color. The moment he finished, the pressure in his head vanished. The shadow man was gone. The office door creaked open again. Ben stumbled out onto the platform. The ghostly passengers were gone. The station was dark and empty. He was alone. He felt a terrible sadness. He had signed something. He had agreed to something. But he did not know what. He looked for a way out. There was only one path leading away from the station. It was the old railroad track, heading deeper into the woods. He had to follow it. There was no going back. He started walking. The trees here were strange. They were twisted into awful shapes. They looked like they were in pain. After a while, he heard a new sound. It was water. Not a lake this time. It was a river. The path led him to the edge of a wide, slow-moving river. The water was black. It did not reflect the moon. On the other side of the river, he saw a light. It was a small, warm light from a cabin window. It looked like home. It looked safe. He felt a surge of hope. Maybe he could cross. Maybe he could get away. Then he saw the boat. It was an old, wooden rowboat tied to a dead tree on the bank. It looked rotten. A figure sat in the boat. It was wrapped in a dark cloak. The figure held a long pole. It was waiting. Ben knew this was wrong. It was a story he had heard before. But the light from the cabin across the river was so tempting. It promised warmth and safety. He walked to the edge of the water. Ben said, "Can you take me across?" The figure did not answer. It just gestured with a pale hand for him to get in the boat. Ben hesitated. He looked at the dark water. He looked back at the dark woods. He had no other choice. He stepped into the boat. It rocked dangerously. The boat felt like it could sink at any moment. The figure pushed away from the bank with the pole. The boat moved silently into the black river. The water made no sound against the boat. It was too quiet. Halfway across, the figure spoke. Its voice was dry, like rustling leaves. The ferryman said, "You have signed the log. You are one of the waiting ones now." Ben said, "Waiting for what? What did I sign?" The ferryman said, "The train is late. It is always late. But it will come. You will board it. You will ride forever. That is the way." Ben felt his blood turn cold. He had signed away his life. He was trapped here. The boat hit the other bank. The cabin was just up a small hill. Its light still glowed. The ferryman pointed toward it. The ferryman said, "Your rest is there. Until the train comes." Ben got out of the boat. He felt numb. He walked up the hill to the cabin. He pushed the door open. The inside was one small room. A fire burned in the fireplace. A simple bed was in the corner. It looked cozy. It looked real. But he knew it was a trick. It was a prison. He sat on the bed and put his head in his hands. He was so tired. He had been walking for hours. He looked out the small window. He could see the river and the dark woods beyond. He could see the ghostly station across the water. He was on an island. There was no way off. He was stuck here, waiting. He lay down on the bed. He stared at the ceiling. The fire crackled. It was the only sound. Then another sound started, very faint. It was music. It was an old, sad song from a music box. It was coming from under the bed. The tune was familiar. It was a lullaby his grandmother used to sing to him. A song about going home. He slowly got off the bed. He knelt down on the floor. He looked under the bed. It was too dark to see. He reached his hand under. His fingers touched something cold and metal. He pulled it out. It was a small, tarnished music box. The lid was open. The little metal drum was turning, playing the sad tune. He had not wound it up. It was playing by itself. As he held it, the song began to change. The notes became twisted and wrong. The gentle lullaby became a scary, jangling mess. It sounded like screaming. He tried to close the lid, but it was stuck. The terrible music got louder and louder. It filled the small cabin. He threw the music box on the floor. It broke into pieces. The music stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Then a new sound started. A slow, steady knocking on the cabin door. The knocking was soft. It was not a hard knock. It was like someone tapping with their fingertips. Tap, tap, tap. It was patient. It would not stop. Ben held his breath. He did not move. He hoped whoever it was would go away. A voice spoke from the other side of the door. It was the voice of a little girl. It sounded sweet and sad. The girl said, "Mister, are you in there? I'm lost. I'm so cold." Ben's heart hurt. It was the same crying voice from the woods. He wanted to help, but he knew better now. Nothing here was real. Nothing here was safe. He stayed quiet. The girl said, "Please, mister. The man with the burned hands is looking for me. Please let me in." Ben stood up. He walked slowly to the door. He put his eye to the crack between the old wooden planks. He could not see anyone outside. The porch was empty. The girl said, "I can see you." Her voice was right on the other side of the door. Ben jumped back. He was scared. How did she know? He had to see. He had to know what this was. His hand shook as he reached for the door handle. He turned it slowly. He pulled the door open just a crack. The night air rushed in. It was freezing cold. There was no one there. He opened the door a little more. He looked down. A small girl stood there. She wore a white dress. It was old-fashioned. Her face was pale. She held a small doll. She smiled at him, but her eyes were wrong. They were solid black. No white. No color. Just black. The girl said, "You found my music box. Thank you. Will you play with me?" Ben could not speak. He tried to close the door. It would not move. It was stuck open. The little girl took a step forward. She was going to come inside. Ben said, "No. Stay back." He pushed hard on the door. It slammed shut. He leaned against it, breathing hard. He heard a little laugh from outside. It was not a sweet laugh. It was a mean, cold laugh. Then it faded away. Ben locked the door. He knew it was useless. Locks would not keep these things out. He went back to the bed and sat down. He put his head in his hands again. He was so tired. His eyes felt heavy. He could not stay awake. He lay down. Against his will, he fell asleep. He dreamed of the train. He was standing on the platform with the other ghosts. They were all waiting. The air was cold and still. Then they heard it. A distant whistle. The sound of an engine chugging. Getting closer. The ground began to shake. A light appeared down the tracks. It was a bright white light. It was not the lantern. It was the headlamp of a train. The train itself was made of black smoke and shadow. It rushed into the station without slowing down. It did not stop. The doors on the cars were open. Inside was only darkness. The ghosts began to board the train. They walked silently into the blackness. A hand grabbed Ben's arm. It was the shadow man with the burned hands. He pulled Ben toward an open door. Ben tried to fight. He could not move. The shadow man pushed him toward the door. The darkness inside the train car reached out for him like a living thing. Ben woke up screaming. He was covered in cold sweat. The fire in the fireplace had gone out. The cabin was dark and freezing. He was not alone. Sitting in a chair in the corner of the room was the little girl. She was rocking back and forth. She was humming the broken lullaby. Her black eyes were watching him. The girl said, "You had a bad dream. The train dream. We all have it." Ben sat up. He pressed his back against the wall. Ben said, "What are you? What do you want?" The girl said, "We want company. It gets lonely waiting. The train is always late." She stopped rocking. "Do you want to see my doll? She's very old." She held out the doll. It was made of porcelain. Its face was cracked. One of its eyes was missing. It wore a tiny version of the railroad lantern on a string around its neck. The little girl smiled her empty smile. The girl said, "She shows you the way. She helps you find the path. Just like she helped you." Ben understood. The lantern light. It was not a lantern at all. It was this doll's toy. This little ghost girl had led him here. He felt anger push through his fear. Ben said, "Why me? Why did you bring me here?" The girl's smile vanished. Her face became sad. The girl said, "The conductor needs more passengers. The train must be full. It is the only way he can rest. He is so very tired." She stood up from the chair. She placed the doll on the floor. She pointed at it. The girl said, "She will wake you when it is time." Then she turned and walked through the closed door. She vanished. Ben was alone again. He stared at the doll on the floor. He did not want to touch it. He got out of bed. He went to the fireplace. He needed to make a fire. He needed light and warmth. He found some old wood next to the hearth. He piled it up. He reached for the matches on the mantelpiece. His hand stopped. Next to the matches was a small, old book. It was covered in dust. He had not seen it before. He picked it up. The cover said Station Master's Log. His heart beat faster. This was different from the visitor log. This was the station master's personal book. He opened it. The handwriting was messy and frantic. He read the last entry. October 31st, 1912. The curse is real. He walks the tracks. The conductor. He seeks souls for his phantom train. He uses the child to lure them. She is the first passenger. She is forever lost. I have tried to break the chain. I have hidden his tool, the key to the final car. It is buried where the water meets the stone. Without it, the train cannot be completed. He cannot move on. We are all trapped. The knocking comes for me now. I hear the child's laughter. God help me. Ben dropped the book. He felt a new feeling. It was not hope. It was a purpose. There was a key to the final train car. If he could find it, maybe he could stop this. Maybe he could break the curse. He looked out the window. The sky was still dark. He had to find that key, where the water meets the stone. He thought about the river. There were rocks along the bank. He had to look there. He grabbed the matches and lit the fire. He needed to see. As the flames grew, he saw something outside the window. A light. The golden lantern light. It was back. It was floating down by the riverbank. It was waiting for him. The doll on the floor began to glow with the same light. The key to his prison was also his guide. He had to follow it again. He took a deep breath. He opened the cabin door and stepped back out into the cold night. The lantern light bobbed gently. It led him down toward the black water, toward the stones. The air by the river was much colder. A thin, wet fog clung to the black water. The lantern light hovered just above the bank, casting a weak golden circle on the dark stones. Ben walked toward it, his boots sinking in the soft mud. The light did not move away this time. It stayed in one spot, shining down on a particular place where the water gently lapped against a large, flat rock. This was it, where the water meets the stone. Ben knelt down. The mud was cold and wet through his pants. He reached into the icy water. He felt around the base of the flat rock. His fingers brushed against slimy weeds and hard riverbed. Nothing. He pushed his arm deeper, the cold making his teeth chatter. His fingertips touched something metal. It was small and felt like it had a loop on one end. He grabbed it and pulled his hand out of the water. In his palm was an old, rusty key. It was long and thin. It felt heavy for its size. The moment he pulled the key from the water, the lantern light above him flickered wildly. It flashed from gold to an angry, violent red, and then went out completely, plunging him into near darkness. The little music box tune started playing again, but it was everywhere now, coming from the trees and the water itself. It was loud and screeching. The doll was not happy. From across the river, a deep horn sounded. It was not a train whistle. It was the low, mournful bellow of a ship's horn. Ben looked up. A shape was moving on the water through the fog. It was an old, towering steamship. It was silent and rotting. Ghostly figures stood on its decks. It was impossible. The river was not deep enough for a ship that size. It was another part of the curse, another lost thing pulled into this nightmare. The ship began to turn, its great hull moving slowly, aiming its bow toward his side of the river. It was coming for him. He had to get away from the water. He shoved the key deep into his pocket and scrambled up the bank. He ran back toward the cabin. He needed to think. He burst through the cabin door and slammed it shut. He leaned against it, breathing hard. The horrible music stopped. The cabin was quiet. The fire was still burning. He took the key out of his pocket. It was cold and wet. What was it for? The log mentioned a final train car. This key must unlock it. But why? What was inside? He heard a new sound outside. A slow, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through the dirt. Scrape. Thump. Scrape. Thump. It was coming from the side of the cabin. He crept to the window and peered out. The little girl was there. She was dragging her doll behind her in the dirt. The doll's head thumped on every rock. She stopped and looked right at the window. Her black eyes found his. The girl said, "You took something that doesn't belong to you. The conductor is very angry. He is coming." Ben backed away from the window. He heard the dragging sound move to the front of the cabin. Then it stopped right outside the door. He waited. Nothing happened. No knock. No sound. The silence was worse. He had to look. He moved closer to the door. He put his eye to the crack again. A single, black eye was on the other side, looking back at him. He cried out and fell backward. The door handle began to jiggle. Then it started to turn. Slowly. The lock he had thrown was old and rusty. It held. For now. A deep, rasping voice spoke from the other side. It was the voice of a man who had not spoken in 100 years. The conductor said, "The key. Give me the key." Ben said, "No. Leave me alone." The conductor said, "You're a passenger. You signed the log. You belong to the train. The key is mine. It is the only thing that holds me here. Give it back." Ben clutched the key in his hand. The metal felt warmer now. He understood. This key was not for the train. It was for the conductor. It was what kept him trapped here, forcing him to collect souls. If Ben gave him the key, the conductor would be free. And maybe everyone else would be too. But could he trust the voice of a monster? The doorknob shook violently. The whole door rattled in its frame. The lock was going to break. Ben looked around the small cabin for another way out. There was only the window. He ran to it. It was small, but he could fit. He pushed it open. The cold night air rushed in. He looked back at the door. The wood around the lock was splintering. A long, burned black finger poked through the crack. Ben turned and climbed out the window. He dropped to the ground and started running. He did not know where to go. The only path was the railroad track. He ran toward it. Behind him, he heard the cabin door smash into pieces. A furious roar filled the night. The conductor was coming. Ben ran down the railroad tracks. His lungs burned. The rusty key was gripped tight in his hand. The tracks began to vibrate. A low rumble grew behind him. He dared to look back. A light was coming down the tracks. The headlamp of the train. The phantom train was coming for him. It was moving fast. Too fast. He could never outrun it. The tracks shook under his feet. The train whistle screamed right behind him. It was going to run him over. He saw a narrow path leading off the tracks into the trees. He dove for it just as the train roared past. It was a blur of black metal and smoke. The faces of ghosts stared out from the windows. They looked sad and empty. The train rushed by and then vanished into the darkness ahead, its sound disappearing instantly. The sudden silence was deafening. Ben lay on the ground, shaking. He had gotten away. For now. He stood up. He was in another part of the woods. The trees were different here. They were all dead, blackened and burned. In the center of a clearing stood a single, old train car. It was off its wheels, sitting crooked on the ground. It was the final car. This was it. He walked toward it. The door was sealed shut with a large, rusty padlock. This was what the key was for. He took the key out of his pocket. He stepped up to the door. He could feel a terrible cold coming from inside the car. He reached out with the key. His hand was shaking. This was the moment. Would it free everyone? Or would it unleash something worse? He pushed the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. He turned it. The lock clicked open. The padlock fell open with a heavy, final clunk. It hit the ground, stirring up ashes. Ben stood frozen, his hand still on the cold metal door. What was inside? The silence around him was absolute. Even the wind had died. He took a deep breath. He had to see. He grabbed the handle and pulled. The door was heavy and stuck. He pulled harder, putting his whole weight into it. With a shriek of rusted metal, it slid open a foot. A smell washed over him. It was the smell of old smoke and something worse. Something sweet and rotten. The inside of the car was pitch black. It was a darkness that seemed to swallow the little light from the dead trees. He could see nothing. He fumbled for his flashlight, his fingers numb with cold and fear. He clicked it on and pointed the beam inside. The light swept over piles of old, burned luggage. Suitcases were melted together. Trunks were charred black. This was a baggage car. But that wasn't all. In the middle of the car, something was piled up. Something that made his stomach turn. It was bones. Human bones. They were scattered and blackened by fire. This was where the victims ended up. This was the final stop. A deep sadness filled him. So many people, lured here and lost forever. His light beam moved to the far wall. Something was written there, scrawled in what looked like charcoal. It was a message. He stepped into the car to read it. The floor was covered in a fine gray ash. His footsteps were silent. The words on the wall were messy, written in a hurry. He was the conductor. The fire was his fault. He fell asleep. The lantern tipped over. He saved himself. He let us burn. The curse is his punishment. He must fill his train with souls to replace the ones he lost. He can never rest. We can never rest. Break his lantern to break the chain. Ben read the words again. Break his lantern. The ghostly lantern that led him here. That was the source. That was the key to everything. He had to find it and destroy it. A cold voice spoke from the doorway behind him, blocking the light. The conductor said, "You should not be in here. This is my place." Ben spun around. The conductor stood there, filling the doorway. He was tall and thin, dressed in the burned remains of his uniform. His skin was pulled tight over his skull, blackened and shiny in places. His eyes were deep holes of shadow. In one hand, he held his old railroad lantern. It glowed with that same cold, dead light. The conductor said, "You have the key. You open my shame. Now you will stay here. With them." He gestured with his free hand at the bones on the floor. Ben backed away, deeper into the dark car. His heart was a hammer in his chest. He had nothing to fight with. He was trapped. The conductor said, "The key. Give it to me." Ben's hand closed around the key in his pocket. It was warm now, almost hot. He thought of the message on the wall. Break his lantern. That was the only way. But how could he get to it? The conductor took a step into the car. He reached for Ben with a burned, skeletal hand. Ben acted without thinking. He didn't throw the key. He threw his flashlight. He threw it as hard as he could right at the lantern in the conductor's hand. The conductor was surprised. He moved to protect the lantern, swinging it away. The flashlight missed the lantern, but hit the conductor's arm. It was enough. For a split second, the conductor was off balance. Ben lunged forward. He didn't go for the conductor. He went for the lantern. His fingers brushed against the cold glass. The conductor roared in anger. He swung his arm, hitting Ben in the chest. Ben fell back into the pile of bones. They cracked and crumbled under him. The taste of ash filled his mouth. The conductor stood over him, raising the lantern high like a weapon. Its light was blinding. The conductor said, "You will burn like the rest." But Ben was not giving up. His hand landed on something long and hard in the pile of debris. It was a piece of metal pipe. He grabbed it. As the conductor brought the lantern down toward his head, Ben swung the pipe with all his strength. He did not swing at the conductor. He swung at the lantern. The metal pipe connected with the glass lantern with a terrible crash. Glass shattered. The cold, dead light exploded outwards in a silent flash of white. For a moment, everything was pure white. Then the light was gone. The lantern was destroyed. The conductor screamed. It was a sound of pure pain and loss. He dropped to his knees, clutching the broken remains of the lantern. His form began to fade. He looked up at Ben, and for a moment, his face was not a monster's. It was just a sad, tired man's face. The conductor said, "Thank you." Then he was gone. He vanished into nothing. The darkness in the baggage car became total. Ben was alone. He lay there in the silence, surrounded by bones and ash. He had done it. He had broken the curse. He waited for something to happen, for the woods to disappear, for a way home to appear. Nothing happened. The car was still there. The dead trees were still outside. He was still trapped. A feeling of despair started to creep over him. Had it worked? Then he saw a light. A soft, warm, golden light. It was outside the car. It was not the dead lantern light. This was different. It was real. He crawled out of the baggage car, his body aching. The light was floating a few yards away. It was a will-o'-the-wisp, a natural gas light from the swamp. But it felt friendly. It bobbed gently, then started to move away. It was going back the way he had come. Back toward the river. Back toward the station. Ben followed it. He was tired and hurt, but he followed. The light led him through the dead woods. It led him to the riverbank. The black water was gone. The river was just a normal, shallow stream now. The ghostly steamship was gone. The light led him across the stream, showing him stepping stones he could use. On the other side, the old station was still there. But it was different. It was not glowing. It was just a ruined, burned-out shell of a building. It was real. The will-o'-the-wisp light floated to the center of the platform and vanished. Ben stood there in the real world. The sun was starting to come up. The sky was turning gray. He could hear birds singing. He was free. He took a deep breath of the cold morning air. It tasted clean. He looked down at the rusty key still in his hand. He dropped it on the tracks. He started to walk away from the station. He walked for a long time. He found a real hiking trail. He followed it. After an hour, he saw a familiar sign. He knew where he was. He was only a mile from his cabin. He almost cried with relief. He started to run. He ran down the path toward home. He burst out of the trees into the clearing where his cabin stood. Smoke was rising from the chimney. Everything looked normal. He ran to the door and threw it open. He was safe. He was home. He leaned against the doorframe, catching his breath. He looked inside his cozy cabin, and then he saw it. Sitting on his kitchen table, in the middle of a patch of morning sunlight, was a small porcelain doll. It had one eye missing, and around its neck, on a tiny string, hung a perfect miniature railroad lantern. It glowed with a soft, cold, golden light. Ben's blood ran cold. The air in the cabin, which had felt so warm and safe a moment before, turned icy. He stared at the doll. It was real. It was here. The tiny lantern on its neck pulsed with a soft, familiar light. He had not escaped. The curse was not broken. It had just followed him home. He heard a sound then. A very faint, very distant train whistle. It was not coming from the woods. It was coming from inside his own cabin. It was coming from the doll. The little lantern's light grew brighter, filling the room with its cold, golden glow. It was not a light that showed the way out. It was a light that showed you were already where you were supposed to be. Trapped. The walls of his cabin began to fade. The comfortable furniture melted away like smoke. The world dissolved into that same faded, colorless place he had been before. He was standing on the platform of the Willow Creek Crossing station. The ghostly passengers were all around him. They were waiting. They looked at him with their empty eyes. They had a new passenger now. Him. The train whistle blew again, much closer this time. The tracks began to vibrate under his feet. A bright white light appeared down the tracks. The phantom train was coming. It was right on time. He tried to move his feet, to run, but they were stuck fast to the platform, as if held by invisible roots. He could only watch as the black, smoky train rushed into the station without slowing down. The doors slid open. The darkness inside was endless. The other passengers began to board, walking silently into the blackness. He felt a hand on his back. It was not a burned hand. It was a small, cold hand. He looked down. The little girl stood next to him, holding her doll. She smiled her empty smile. The girl said, "It's time to go. The train is here. You are home." She pushed him gently forward. His feet were free now, but they would only move toward the train. He took a step, then another. He was at the door. The darkness inside reached out for him. It was cold. It was final. He took one last look over his shoulder. He could see his real cabin, his real world, through a fading window in the air. It was so close. He could see the coffee pot on his stove, the book he had been reading. Then the window closed, and it was gone forever. He stepped into the train car. The door slid shut behind him with a solid, heavy sound. The train let out a long, loud whistle and began to move. It picked up speed, rushing through the endless, silent woods. He was a passenger now. He would always be a passenger. The train never stops. It just rides on forever through the dark. Name of the next story: Whispers in the Lookout Tower. The old forest was quiet. Too quiet. Ranger Ben Carter sat in his small cabin. He was doing his nightly radio check. The static hissed softly. He was about to sign off when a voice cut through the noise. It was faint and broken. The voice said, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Ben sat up straight. That was strange. All other rangers were off duty. Their stations were closed for the night. He picked up the microphone. Ben said, "This is Ranger Carter at Station 7. Who is this?" There was a long pause. Only the static remained. Then the voice returned. It was a little clearer now. It sounded like a young man. He sounded scared. The voice said, "The tower. Can you see the tower?" Ben felt a chill. The only tower around was the old fire lookout on Black Ridge. It had been abandoned for 20 years. It was falling apart. No one went up there. Ben said, "Identify yourself. What is your call sign?" The voice said, "The wires are singing. They're singing my name." The voice dropped to a whisper. "He's in the walls." Then the transmission cut out. The radio returned to its gentle static. Ben put the microphone down. His hand was shaking a little. It was probably just kids. Kids playing a prank with an old radio. They must have broken into the lookout tower. He tried to put it out of his mind. He went back to his paperwork, but the voice kept echoing in his head. It had sounded so real, so afraid. An hour later, the radio crackled to life again. This time, it was a different voice. It was a woman's voice. She was crying. The woman said, "Please help me. I can't find the way down. The stairs just keep going." Ben grabbed the mic. This was not funny anymore. Ben said, "Ma'am, you need to calm down. Where are you? Are you at the Black Ridge lookout?" The woman sobbed. The lights in the trees, they're watching me." Her voice broke into a scream. "He's behind the door." The transmission ended with a loud crash. Then silence. Ben's heart was pounding. This was no prank. The fear in those voices was too real. He tried to raise them again. Ben said, "Hello? Come in. Are you okay?" No answer. He tried calling the sheriff's office on the phone. The line was dead. He picked up his radio to try another channel. A new voice came through. It was a child humming a tuneless song. The humming stopped. The child said, "The man in the tower says you should come play." Ben dropped the microphone. It clattered on the desk. He stared at the radio. This was wrong. All of this was wrong. He had to check it out. It was his job. He put on his jacket and grabbed his big flashlight. He loaded his truck and headed for Black Ridge. The road was narrow and dark. His headlights cut through the night. The trees looked like tall, dark giants. He drove for 30 minutes. He finally reached the base of the ridge. The road to the top was blocked by a rusty gate. He got out of his truck. The air was cold and still. He looked up at the ridge. At the very top, he could see the dark shape of the lookout tower, and then he saw a light, a single, flickering light in one of the tower's windows. It looked like a candle, or a lantern. Someone was definitely up there. He unlocked the gate and drove through. The road up the mountain was even worse. It was full of potholes and loose rocks. His truck bounced along slowly. The trees pressed in on both sides. His radio suddenly crackled. The child's voice was back. It was singing a nursery rhyme, but the words were wrong. The child sang, "Ring around the tower, pockets full of wire, ashes, ashes, we all fall down." The singing turned into quiet giggling. Then the radio went dead. The engine of his truck sputtered. Then it died completely. The lights went out. He was alone in the dark. He turned the key. Nothing happened. The battery was dead. It was like all the power was drained away. He was stuck. He got out of the truck. He looked up the road. The tower was still a long walk away. He had no choice. He had to go up. He started walking. The only sound was his own footsteps, and the wind in the trees. It sounded like whispering. After a few minutes, he heard something else. A faint voice. It was coming from his pocket. He pulled out his handheld radio. It was turned off, but the voice was coming from it anyway. The voice whispered, "You're getting closer. We can see you." He threw the radio into the woods. He kept walking. His flashlight beam danced on the road ahead. He saw something move between the trees. A pale shape. It was gone before he could focus. He walked faster. The road seemed to go on forever. He finally reached the top of the ridge. The lookout tower stood in a small clearing. The wooden structure was old and rotting. The stairs going up to the cabin were steep and shaky. The flickering light was still in the window. He called out. Ben said, "Hello? This is the park ranger. Come out with your hands where I can see them." There was no answer, only the creaking of the old tower in the wind. He took a deep breath and started climbing the stairs. They groaned under his weight. He thought they might break. He reached the top. The door to the lookout cabin was closed. A padlock hung from the latch, but it was open. Rusty, like it hadn't been used in years. He pushed the door open. The inside was a mess. There was broken glass on the floor. Old maps were scattered everywhere. In the center of the room, on a small table, was an old oil lantern. Its flame was burning low, but there was no one there. The place was empty. He stepped inside. The floorboards creaked. He saw the old radio equipment in the corner. It was covered in dust. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades. So where were the voices coming from? A cold breeze blew through a broken window. The lantern flame flickered. And then, the radio on the desk crackled with static. A voice he knew all too well came out. It was his own voice. The radio said, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Ben froze. His own voice, laced with that same fear from hours ago, echoed back at him from the dusty speaker. It was a perfect recording, a loop of his first contact. The lantern flame sputtered, and the voice on the radio changed. It became the scared young man. The voice said, "The tower. Can you see the tower?" Then the woman's sob. Then the child's twisted song. They played one after another, a symphony of terror coming from the dead machine. Ben backed toward the door. This was a trap. The voices were never real. They were a lure. The door slammed shut behind him with a loud bang. He hadn't touched it. He grabbed the handle and turned. It was locked. He was trapped inside. The radio fell silent. The only sound was the wind whistling through the broken window. And then a new sound, a soft scratching. It was coming from the walls. It sounded like long fingernails dragging slowly down the inside of the wooden planks. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It moved around the room. Behind him, to his left, to his right. He spun around, shining his flashlight at the walls. He saw nothing but old, cracked wood. A whisper came from the corner. It was so quiet he almost missed it. The whisper said, "We're in the wires." Ben aimed his light at the corner. A mess of old telephone wires was piled there, chewed by animals. The scratching sound got louder. It was coming from the wire pile. Something moved within the tangled cords. A long, thin, pale hand slithered out from the center of the pile. Its fingers ended in broken, dirty nails. It scratched at the floorboards. Then another hand appeared. They pulled, and a figure began to emerge from the nest of wires. It was a person, but wrong. Its limbs were too long. Its skin was white like a grub. It had no eyes, just smooth skin where eyes should be. It turned its head toward him. The thing opened its mouth. A raspy, wire-thin voice came out. The creature said, "You answered the call. You came to the tower. Now you join the chorus." Ben stumbled backward. He hit the old radio desk. His hand landed on the heavy, dusty microphone. He grabbed it. It was the only thing he had. The creature crawled fully out of the wires. It moved in a jerky, unnatural way. It started toward him. Ben swung the microphone. It hit the creature in the side of its head with a dull thud. The thing didn't even flinch. It kept coming. It was faster now. Ben backed into the far wall. There was nowhere to go. The creature reached for him. Its cold fingers brushed against his arm. He screamed and lashed out with his boot, kicking it in the chest. It felt like kicking a bag of sticks. The thing grabbed his ankle. Its grip was iron strong and freezing cold. It started pulling him toward the pile of wires. Ben fought, grabbing at the floorboards, but he was sliding easily across the dusty floor. The wires in the corner began to writhe like snakes. They reached for him. He could see other shapes moving deep within the tangle. Pale faces, skeletal hands. He was not the first. He was just the latest. The creature pulled him closer. The wires brushed against his face. They were cold and metallic. They felt alive. He closed his eyes, expecting the end. But nothing happened. He opened them. The creature had stopped. Its head was tilted. It was listening. Outside, a new sound cut through the wind. It was a familiar engine rumble. Headlights flashed through the broken window, sweeping across the room. Someone was here. The creature let out a hiss of anger. It released his ankle and scrambled back into the pile of wires. The other shapes retreated with it. In a second, they were gone. The wires were just wires again. The door to the cabin flew open. A man stood there, holding a powerful flashlight. It was Sheriff Miller. He looked big and solid and real. Sheriff Miller said, "Ben? Good Lord, man. What are you doing up here? Your truck's dead at the bottom of the road." Ben could hardly speak. He pointed a shaking finger at the wire pile. Ben said, "Th there. In the wires. Something was in there." The sheriff shone his light into the corner. He saw the old, chewed-up wires. He looked back at Ben, his face concerned. Sheriff Miller said, "Ben, it's just junk. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ben got to his feet, rubbing his sore ankle. He told the sheriff everything. The voices on the radio. The climb. The thing in the wires. The sheriff listened patiently. He didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly. Sheriff Miller said, "This old place. It's got a history. Bad history. Folks say the old phone lines are haunted. They say the wires remember every call for help that ever went through M. Every lost hiker. Every cry in the dark. They say it all got stuck in there. And sometimes it leaks out." Ben stared at the wire pile. It looked harmless now. Just old junk. Sheriff Miller said, "Come on. Let's get you down the mountain. My truck's right outside." Ben followed him out onto the platform. The cold night air felt good on his face. He felt like he could breathe again. The sheriff started down the stairs first. Ben took one last look back into the dark cabin. The oil lantern on the table flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. He turned and hurried down the stairs after the sheriff. They got into the sheriff's truck. The engine was running. The radio was on, playing soft country music. It sounded wonderful, normal. The sheriff turned the truck around and started driving down the mountain road. Ben leaned his head against the window. He watched the trees go by. He was safe. It was over. The sheriff's radio crackled. The music cut out. A voice came through. It was the voice of the scared young man. The voice said, "Don't leave. Don't leave us here." Ben sat up straight. His blood went cold. Sheriff Miller said, "Darn radio. Mountains mess with the signal all the time." He reached out to change the channel. Ben said, "No. Wait. Did you hear that?" Sheriff Miller said, "Hear what?" "Just static." The voice came again. It was the woman this time. The woman cried, "He's in the truck with you." Ben looked at the sheriff. The man was just staring ahead at the road, humming along to the static. He hadn't heard a thing. Ben looked into the rearview mirror. In the back seat of the truck, he saw a pale shape. It was the creature. It was sitting right behind him. Its eyeless face was pointed toward him. It raised one long, thin finger and pressed it to where its lips would be. "Shoo!" Ben opened his mouth to scream. The sheriff looked over at him. Sheriff Miller said, "You all right, Ben? You're white as a sheet." Ben pointed a shaking finger toward the back seat. Ben said, "Behind you. Look behind you." The sheriff glanced into the rearview mirror. He saw nothing. The back seat was empty. Sheriff Miller said, "There's nothing there, son. You're just shook up. It's okay. We're almost down." Ben stared into the mirror. The creature was gone. Had he imagined it? Was it all in his head? He didn't know what to believe anymore. They reached the bottom of the mountain. The sheriff drove through the gate and stopped next to Ben's dead truck. Sheriff Miller said, "I'll get a tow truck out here first thing in the morning. For now, let's get you back to the station. You can sleep on the cot tonight." Ben nodded. He was too tired to argue, too scared to be alone. The sheriff drove toward the ranger station. The radio stayed on the country music station. It played without any more strange voices. Maybe it was over. Maybe the sheriff was right. He was just shook up. They pulled up to the ranger station. The lights were on inside. It looked warm and safe. They got out of the truck and walked inside. Ben's own radio was still sitting on his desk. It was silent. The sheriff put on a pot of coffee. Sheriff Miller said, "This'll warm you up. Then you get some rest." Ben sat down at his desk. He put his head in his hands. He was exhausted. The coffee pot began to gurgle. And under that sound, Ben heard something else. A very faint whisper. It was coming from his two-way radio. The sheriff was across the room, getting mugs out of the cupboard. He couldn't hear it. Ben leaned closer to the radio. The whisper was his own voice. The radio whispered, "He's in the walls." Ben jerked back from the radio. The whisper was gone. The only sound was the sheriff humming and the coffee pot bubbling. He must be hearing things. The stress was getting to him. The sheriff brought over a steaming mug and placed it on the desk. Sheriff Miller said, "Here you go. Strong and black. Just how you like it." Ben nodded his thanks. He wrapped his hands around the warm mug. The heat felt good. Real. He took a sip. The sheriff leaned against the desk, looking down at him. Sheriff Miller said, "You know, stories about that tower, they go way back. Old-timers used to talk about it. They said the first lookout man went crazy up there, alone for too long. He started hearing things on the wires. Then he started talking to them. They found him a week later. He had torn all the wires out of the wall. He was trying to stuff them into his ears." The sheriff shook his head. "Like I said, bad history." Ben shuddered. The story was too close to what he had experienced. He took another drink of coffee. He felt a little better. The warm liquid was calming his nerves. The sheriff's radio on his belt crackled with a burst of static. A dispatcher's voice came through, faint and broken. Dispatcher said, "Unit 12, respond to fallen tree en route." The sheriff tapped his radio. Sheriff Miller said, "Copy that, dispatch. Headed there now." He looked at Ben. "I gotta go. You gonna be okay here? Lock the door after me. Get some sleep." Ben said, Yeah, I'll be fine. Thanks, Sheriff." The sheriff gave him a pat on the shoulder and left. Ben heard his truck start up and drive away. The ranger station was quiet. Too quiet. Ben finished his coffee. He was so tired. His eyes felt heavy. He decided to take the sheriff's advice. He went to the small cot in the back room and lay down. He fell asleep almost instantly. He dreamed of wires. They were wrapping around his arms and legs. They were pulling him into a dark hole in the wall. A voice was whispering his name over and over. He woke up with a gasp. The room was dark. He must have slept for a few hours. He sat up on the cot. Something was wrong. The air felt thick, heavy. He could hear a faint humming sound. It was coming from the main room, from his radio. He stood up and slowly walked to the doorway. The main room was dark except for the green power light on his radio. It was on, but it was turned off. He knew he had turned it off. The humming grew louder. It was the same tuneless hum the child on the radio had made. Then a voice broke through the hum. It was the sheriff's voice, but it was flat and wrong. The radio said, "Ben, you there? I'm coming back. Forgot my mug." Ben's blood ran cold. The sheriff had taken his mug with him. He had seen him carry it out. This was a trick, another lure. He didn't answer. He backed away from the doorway. He heard a sound outside. A car engine. Headlights flashed through the window, lighting up the room for a second. A car door slammed shut. Heavy footsteps walked toward the station door. The doorknob jiggled. Then there was a knock. It was loud and slow. Sheriff's voice said, "Ben, you in there? Open up. It's cold out here." Ben stood frozen. He knew it wasn't the sheriff. It couldn't be. The thing on the radio had just pretended to be him. The knocking came again. Harder this time. The door shook in its frame. Sheriff's voice said, "I know you're in there, Ben. Let me in." The voice was changing. It was losing the sheriff's tone. It was becoming raspier, thinner, more like the thing from the tower. Ben looked around for a weapon. He saw a heavy fire poker next to the wood stove. He grabbed it. He held it tight. The knocking stopped. There was silence for a full minute. Ben hoped it had given up. Then he heard a new sound. A scratching sound. It was coming from the roof. Scratch, scratch, scrape. Something was on the roof. It was dragging itself across the shingles. It moved toward the chimney. Ben looked up at the ceiling. He heard a clattering sound from the wood stove pipe. Soot and dust rained down into the stove. Something was trying to get in through the chimney. The scratching moved away from the chimney. It went to the edge of the roof above the front window. Ben saw a long, pale shadow fall across the window curtain. A hand with two long fingers gripped the edge of the roof. Then another hand. A head rose into view, blocking the moonlight. It was the creature. Its smooth, eyeless face was pressed against the glass. It was looking right at him. It opened its mouth. The sheriff's voice came out, but it was a horrible mockery. The creature said, "Let me in." Ben screamed. He ran to the back room and slammed the door. He locked it. It was a flimsy lock. It would not hold. He pushed a small bookcase in front of the door. It was not heavy enough. He could hear the thing outside. It was scratching at the front door again. Then the scratching stopped. He heard a window break in the main room. It was inside. He heard its feet on the floor. A slow, shuffling drag. It was in the station with him. It was coming toward the back room door. The doorknob turned slowly. Then the thing knocked on the door. A soft, polite knock. The creature whispered, "Ben, can I come in?" Ben backed into the farthest corner of the room. He held the fire poker up, ready to swing. The knocking became a pounding. The flimsy door shook. The bookcase rattled. The lock was going to break. He was trapped. He looked around for another way out. There was a small window in the back wall. It was too small for him to fit through. The pounding on the door got louder. The wood around the lock splintered. A long, pale finger poked through the crack. It hooked around and started pulling the door open. Ben saw a sliver of the thing's face. Its blank, empty skin. He was going to die here, in his own station. The door flew open, smashing the bookcase aside. The creature stood in the doorway. It filled the space. It took a step into the room. It reached for him. Ben swung the fire poker with all his strength. It hit the creature's arm with a sickening crack. The thing didn't make a sound. It just kept coming. Its cold hand closed around Ben's throat. It lifted him off the ground. Ben choked, kicking his legs. He couldn't breathe. The creature's mouth opened wide, wider than should be possible. Inside, it wasn't a throat. It was a tangled mess of glowing wires and static. It was going to pull him in, to join the chorus. Ben's vision started to go black. He dropped the fire poker. His hand brushed against his pants pocket. He felt something hard and rectangular. His handheld radio, the one he thought he had thrown away in the woods. It was in his pocket. It was turned on. The volume was all the way up. A blast of static screamed from the speaker. The creature flinched. Its grip on Ben's throat loosened for a second. It hated the sound. Ben grabbed the radio. He pressed the talk button and held it down. The feedback screeched loudly. He shoved the radio right into the creature's open mouth. He pushed it deep into the tangle of wires. The creature shuddered violently. It dropped Ben. It stumbled backward, clawing at its own face. It was trying to pull the radio out. Blue sparks shot from its mouth. Its body began to convulse. It let out a terrible, high-pitched shriek that sounded like a radio transmission tearing itself apart. Then, it exploded into a cloud of white static and a shower of old, broken wires. The wires fell to the floor and were still. The room was silent. Ben lay on the floor, gasping for air. His throat hurt. He looked at the pile of wires. They were just wires. Nothing more. He had done it. He had beaten it. He started to laugh, a shaky, relieved laugh. He sat up. Then he heard a sound. It was a very faint, very clear voice. It came from the pile of wires on the floor. It was the child's voice. The child whispered, "You can't get rid of us. We're in all the wires." Ben scrambled away from the voice, his back hitting the wall. He stared at the tangled pile. The wires lay still, silent. He must have imagined it. The stress was making him hear things again. He took deep breaths, trying to calm his racing heart. He had to get out of here. He had to get far away from this place. He stood up, his legs shaky. He walked through the broken door into the main room. Glass from the window crunched under his boots. The night air blew in, cold and sharp. He needed to call for help. His truck was dead, but the station phone, he picked up the receiver. There was no dial tone, just a faint, faraway whispering. He slammed it down. Of course, the wires. He looked around the dark station. He felt like the walls were watching him. He had to leave. Now. He ran out the broken front door and into the night. He didn't know where he was going. He just ran. He followed the main road away from the mountain. The moon was bright overhead. His breath puffed out in white clouds. He ran for what felt like miles. His lungs burned. He finally had to stop, leaning against a tree to catch his breath. He was deep in the forest now. He had no light. He was lost. But he was away from the station. That was all that mattered. He heard a sound up ahead. A soft, rhythmic beeping. It was a familiar sound. A cell phone. Someone was out here. Hope surged in his chest. He followed the sound. It led him off the road and into a small clearing. In the middle of the clearing, sitting on a mossy log, was a cell phone. Its screen was lit up. It was beeping because its battery was low. He looked around. There was no one there. The phone was just sitting there, alone in the woods. It was weird, but it was a phone. He could call for help. He walked over and picked it up. The screen showed 1 bar of signal. It was enough. He started to dial 911. The screen flickered. The numbers he was pressing changed on their own. The phone dialed a number he didn't know. He put it to his ear. It rang once. Then a voice answered. It was the woman from the radio. She was crying. The woman said, "Don't trust the lights. They lie." The call dropped. The phone screen went black. The battery was dead. Ben threw the phone into the woods. He was shaking. It was everywhere. It was in everything. He heard a noise behind him. A twig snapping. He spun around. A light was moving between the trees. A flashlight beam. Then a voice called out. The voice said, "Hello? Is someone out there? I'm lost." It was a man's voice. It sounded normal. Scared but normal. Ben felt a wave of relief. It was just another person. Maybe a hiker. He called back. Ben said, "I'm here. Over here." The flashlight beam swung toward him. A man stepped out of the trees. He was dressed in hiking gear. He looked worried. The hiker said, "Thank goodness. I thought I was out here all alone. I got turned around hours ago. My name's Alex." Ben almost hugged him. A real person. A normal person. Ben said, "I'm Ben. I'm a ranger. My truck broke down. We can help each other." Alex smiled. It was a warm, friendly smile. Alex said, "A ranger? Perfect. I think I know a way back to the main road. It's not far. Follow me." Alex turned and started walking back the way he came. Ben followed close behind. The man's flashlight cut a sure path through the trees. Ben felt safe for the first time all night. They walked for about 10 minutes. Ben started to get a strange feeling. The trees looked familiar. Too familiar. Ben said, "Hey, are you sure this is the right way? This looks like it's heading back toward Black Ridge." Alex didn't answer. He just kept walking. His pace was steady. Too steady. Ben said, "Alex? Did you hear me?" Alex stopped. He turned around slowly. His face was different in the moonlight. It was pale. His eyes looked dark and empty. Alex said, "Almost there. The tower is just up ahead." Ben's blood went cold. The voice had changed. It was now the voice of the young man from the radio. Ben said, No, you're not real." Alex's smile returned, but it was wide and wrong. Too many teeth. Alex said, "We're all real. We're just lost. Like you." He turned and kept walking. Ben stood frozen. He couldn't follow. He couldn't move. Alex stopped and looked back. His head tilted. Alex said, "Don't you want to go home? The tower is home." Then Alex's form began to flicker, like a bad television signal. For a second, Ben saw through him. He saw the trees behind him. Then Alex was solid again. He raised his arm and pointed. Ben looked. Through the trees, he could see the dark shape of the lookout tower on the ridge. It was closer than it should be. Much closer. Alex started walking toward it. Ben turned and ran. He ran in the opposite direction. He didn't look back. He heard Alex's voice calling after him. But it was many voices now, all talking at once. The voices said, "Come back. Don't leave us. Join us." He ran until his legs gave out. He collapsed at the base of a large tree, sobbing. He was lost. He was tired. He was hunted. He heard a soft crackle. He looked down. Lying in the leaves next to him was a small walkie-talkie. A child's toy. It was old and dirty. Its little red power light was on. He knew he shouldn't touch it, but he couldn't help it. He picked it up. A voice immediately came out of the tiny speaker. It was his own voice, from when he was a child. Child Ben said, "Hello? Can anyone hear me? I'm scared." Then the voice of the creature, smooth and cold, answered from the toy. The creature said, "We hear you. We're always listening." Ben screamed and threw the walkie-talkie as hard as he could. It smashed against a tree and broke into pieces. The voices stopped. The woods were silent. He curled up into a ball under the tree. He cried until he had no tears left. He was so tired. His eyes closed. He fell into a deep, troubled sleep. He dreamed of voices. Thousands of voices. All talking on phones and radios. All crying for help. All lost. He woke up to the sound of a car engine. The sun was starting to rise, turning the sky gray. He was still in the woods. The sound was close. He got to his feet and stumbled toward the road. A Park Service truck was driving slowly down the road. It was Mike, another ranger. Ben waved his arms wildly. Ben said, "Mike." "Mike, stop." The truck stopped. Mike jumped out. He looked shocked. Mike said, "Ben, what happened to you? You look terrible. We've been looking for you all night. Your truck was abandoned." Ben almost cried with relief. He ran to the truck. Ben said, "You have to get me out of here. Now, don't use the radio. Just drive." Mike looked confused but nodded. He helped Ben into the passenger seat. Mike got in and started driving. Ben stared out the window. The trees looked normal in the morning light. Maybe it was over. Maybe the daylight kept the things away. Mike reached for the radio microphone. Mike said, "I should call in, let them know I found you." Ben shouted, "No, don't." But it was too late. Mike keyed the mic. Mike said, "Base, this is Mike. I found Ben. He's a little shaken up, but he's okay. We're heading back now." The radio crackled. A voice came back. It was the dispatcher's voice. It sounded normal. Dispatcher said, "Copy that, Mike. Good work. Bring him on in." Ben relaxed a little. Maybe it was really over. Mike hung up the mic. He smiled at Ben. Mike said, "See? Everything's fine." They drove for a few minutes in silence. Then Mike's smile faded. His face went blank. He spoke, but his voice was flat and empty. Mike said, "He doesn't think it's over." But it is. For him. Ben stared at Mike. Mike's eyes were fixed on the road. He wasn't blinking. Ben said, "Mike, what did you say?" Mike turned his head. His eyes were completely black. Solid black. Just like the little girl's. He spoke, but the voice was not his. It was the chorus of all the voices together. The voices said, "We told you. We're in all the wires." Mike's foot slammed down on the accelerator. The truck surged forward, speeding down the mountain road. Ben grabbed the door handle. Ben yelled, "Mike, stop! What are you doing?" Mike didn't answer. He just stared ahead with his black eyes. The truck was going too fast. They were heading for a sharp curve. Ben knew they wouldn't make it. He reached for the steering wheel, but Mike's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. His grip was incredibly strong. Cold. The curve was coming up fast. Ben closed his eyes. He heard the voices one last time, whispering from Mike's mouth. The voices whispered, "Welcome to the chorus." The truck left the road. It flew through the air. Time seemed to slow down. Ben saw the trees rushing up to meet them. He heard the crash of metal and glass. Then nothing. Silence. Darkness. The first thing he felt was cold. Then he heard a sound. A soft, steady static. He opened his eyes. He was lying in a ditch. The truck was wrecked against a tree. Mike was gone. There was no sign of him. Ben was hurt. His head was bleeding. His arm felt broken. But he was alive. He tried to move. Pain shot through his body. He saw something a few feet away. It was the truck's radio, smashed on the ground. Its wires were exposed. The static was coming from it. And under the static, he heard a faint, new voice. It was his own voice. It was recording everything. The static from the broken radio hissed like a dying breath. Ben's own voice, weak and terrified, leaked from the speaker. The radio whispered, "Help me, someone please help me." He tried to push himself up, but the pain was too great. He collapsed back into the cold mud. The world started to fade at the edges. The static grew louder, filling his head. It wasn't just coming from the radio anymore. It was in the wind. It was in the leaves. It was inside him. He saw movement. Pale figures emerged from the trees. They were not walking. They were gliding. They were the ones from the wires. They surrounded him. Their eyeless faces looked down at him. They did not look angry. They looked sad. One of them, the one that looked like the young man, reached out a hand. It was not to hurt him. It was to help him. Ben was too weak to fight, too tired to be scared. He took the cold hand. The figures helped him to his feet. His broken arm didn't hurt anymore. His head felt clear. He looked back at the ditch. His body was still lying there, bleeding and broken. He was not in his body anymore. He was with them. The static in his ears became a soft, humming tune. It was the child's song, but it didn't sound scary now. It sounded peaceful. The figures led him away from the road. They did not walk toward the tower. They walked into the thick forest. The trees parted for them. They came to a place where the ground was covered in old, broken things. Rusty phones, shattered radios, chewed-up wires. In the center was a deep, quiet pool of black water. It was still. It reflected nothing. The figures stopped at the edge of the water. They looked at him. They pointed at the water. Ben understood. This was not an end. It was a new beginning, a different kind of life. He looked into the black water. He saw his reflection, but it was not his tired, scared face. It was his face, but calm, at peace. And behind his reflection, he saw countless others. All the lost voices, all the waiting ones. They were all together here. He stepped into the water. It was not cold. It was not wet. It was like stepping into a quiet room. He sank below the surface. The world above disappeared. The static faded away, replaced by a gentle, silent hum. He was home. He was part of the chorus. Back on the road, a tow truck found the wreck. They found Ben's body. They said he died on impact. They never found Mike. The ranger station was closed down. But sometimes on quiet nights, if you turn a radio to the right static-filled channel, you can hear them. A faint whisper among the noise. A cry for help. A child's song. And a new voice, a ranger's voice, always asking the same question. The voice said, "Hello? Is anyone out there? Can anyone hear me?" Name of the next story, The Hollow Campsite. The forest was always quiet, but this was a different kind of quiet. Ranger Mara Soto walked the perimeter of Pine Grove Campground. It was her least favorite patrol. The place gave her the creeps. It was too still. Today the feeling was worse. She couldn't hear any birds. She couldn't hear any squirrels. It was just silent. As she passed by campsite number 8, she stopped. Something was wrong. The tent was there. A small blue dome tent. The flap was open. A campfire was burning in the fire ring. Not a big fire. A small, low fire. A metal coffee pot was sitting on a grill over the flames. Steam was coming out of its spout. It was still cooking. A frying pan sat next to the fire. It had 2 hot dogs in it. They were black and burnt. They had been cooking for a long time. Mara frowned. This was not right. People don't just leave a cooking fire. It was against every rule. It was dangerous. Mara called out, "Hello? Campsite 8. Is anyone here?" There was no answer. Only the crackle of the fire and the hiss of the coffee pot. She stepped closer to the fire. She saw a backpack leaning against a log. It was open. A book lay face down next to it. It was like someone had just gotten up to get more firewood and never came back. But that was impossible. The fire was too low. They had been gone for a while. Mara pulled out her radio. Mara said, "Dispatch, this is Ranger Soto. I'm at Pine Grove, Site 8. I've got an abandoned campsite. Fire is still going. Food on the grill. No sign of the campers. Over." The radio crackled. Dispatch replied. Dispatch said, "Copy that, Soto. Any vehicles?" Over. Mara looked around the site. There was no car. No bike. Nothing. Mara said, "Negative, dispatch. No vehicle. Just the tent and gear. It's weird." Over. Dispatch said, "Okay. Stand by. I'll log a missing persons. Don't touch anything." Over. Mara said, "Copy. Standing by." She put her radio away. She stood there, watching the steam rise from the coffee pot. The smell of burnt meat filled the air. It made her stomach turn. She walked over to the tent. She didn't go inside. She just peeked through the open flap. 2 sleeping bags were laid out side by side. They were rumpled, like people had just gotten out of them. A pair of glasses sat on top of a folded shirt. Everything was normal. Everything except the people were gone. A cold feeling crept up her spine. This was not right. She heard a noise behind her. A soft crunching sound, like a footstep on dry leaves. She spun around, her hand going to her bear spray. Mara said, "Hello? Who's there?" The woods were empty. Nothing moved. The sound had come from the trees behind the campsite. The tall, dark pine trees. She took a step toward the tree line. Her heart was beating fast. Mara said, "This is the park ranger. Show yourself." Silence. Then another sound. A different sound. It was a low hum. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere. It was so low she could feel it in her teeth. It made her head feel fuzzy. The hum stopped as suddenly as it started. The radio on her belt squawked, making her jump. Dispatch said, "Soto? We've got a call." A family reported their kids missing. A boy and a girl. They were camping at Pine Grove, Site 8. Last night was their first night. Over. Mara's blood went cold. Kids. This was worse. Mara said, "Dispatch, their car is gone." "How did they get here?" Over. Dispatch said, "The parents said a friend dropped them off. They were supposed to pick them up this afternoon. The kids aren't answering their cells." Over. Mara looked at the burnt hot dogs. The steaming coffee. They had been here this morning. Something had happened between then and now. Mara said, "I'm going to look around the area." Over. Dispatch said, 10 to 4, Soto. Be careful. Sheriff is on his way. ETA 20 minutes. Over. Mara put her radio away. She had to look. She had to find them. She walked toward the trees where she heard the sound. The ground was soft. She saw footprints. 2 sets. One larger, one smaller. A boy and a girl. The prints led into the woods, away from the campground. Why would they leave their breakfast cooking? She followed the prints. The trees were thick. The light was dim. The footprints were clear in the soft dirt. They walked in a straight line. They did not look like they were running. They looked like they were just walking. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She kept following. The prints led her to a small creek. The water was clear and shallow. The footprints stopped at the water's edge. They did not continue on the other side. It was like they had just vanished into the creek. Mara looked up and down the stream. Nothing. No sign of them. Then she saw it. On a rock in the middle of the creek, something was laying. It was a small, stuffed bear. It was wet. It looked like it had been dropped there. She stepped into the water to get it. The water was ice cold. She picked up the bear. It was dripping. She squeezed it. Water ran out. And then, the low hum started again. It was louder here. It was coming from the water. From the rocks. The sound vibrated through her boots. She dropped the bear and stumbled back onto the bank. The hum stopped. Her radio crackled. It was full of static. A voice broke through. It was a young girl whispering. The girl whispered, "Don't follow. Don't listen to the hum." Then the radio went dead. Mara stared at it. She tried to respond. Mara said, "Hello? Can you hear me? Where are you?" No answer. Just dead air. She was alone. The sheriff was still minutes away. She looked back at the creek. The stuffed bear was gone. The water had washed it away. She heard a new sound. A faint crying. It was a child sobbing. It was coming from further down the creek. It sounded so sad, so scared. Mara started walking toward the sound. She had to help. The crying led her around a bend in the creek. The trees opened up into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a circle of stones, an old fire pit. But this was not a campsite. This was something else. The stones were blackened. Old bones were scattered around the pit. Animal bones. The crying sound was louder here. It seemed to be coming from the ground itself, from the fire pit. Mara took a step closer. The air smelled like ozone, like after a lightning strike. The crying stopped. A new sound started. A voice. It was an old woman's voice, raspy and dry. The voice said, "You should not be here, Ranger. This place is hungry." Mara froze. The voice seemed to come from the trees, the rocks, the very air around her. It was everywhere. Mara said, "Who said that? Show yourself." The old woman's voice chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. The voice said, "I am nowhere. I am everywhere. I am the memory of this place. Leave now, before it tastes you too." Mara's heart was pounding. She tightened her grip on her bear spray. This was insane. She was talking to the forest. Mara said, "Where are the children? What happened to them?" The voice sighed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. The voice said, "Gone. Taken. The hollow does not give back what it takes. It only hungers for more." It called to them. They listened. They always listened to the hum. Mara took a step back. Her boot crunched on something. She looked down. It was a small silver phone. The screen was cracked. She picked it up. The screen lit up. It showed a picture of two teenagers, a boy and a girl, smiling. The missing kids. The phone was unlocked. She opened the photo gallery. The last picture was blurry, dark. It was a picture of the trees. But in between them, something pale was moving. Something shaped like a person, but too thin. Too stretched. The next video was only 10 seconds long. She pressed play. The video was shaky. It showed the campsite from inside the tent. The boy's voice was heard, whispering. The boy said, "Do you hear that? That humming?" The girl's voice replied, scared. The girl said, "It's coming from the woods. It's pretty." The boy said, "I'm gonna go see." The girl said, "No, don't. Wait." The video ended. That was it. The last record of them. Mara felt sick. She heard a car engine in the distance. The sheriff. She turned and ran back toward the campsite. She burst out of the trees. Sheriff Miller's car was parked next to her truck. The sheriff was standing by the cold fire pit, writing in a notebook. He looked up as she ran toward him. Sheriff Miller said, "Mara, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Mara was out of breath. She held up the phone. Mara said, "I found this. By the creek. It's theirs. There's a video." They heard a humming sound. They went into the woods. The sheriff took the phone. He watched the video. His face was serious. Sheriff Miller said, "A humming sound? Could be a generator. Maybe someone else out here." Mara shook her head. Mara said, "No. It wasn't like that. It was different. And I heard a voice. An old woman's voice. She warned me away." The sheriff gave her a long look. He thought she was crazy. She could see it in his eyes. Sheriff Miller said, "All right. Let's not jump to things. We'll do a proper search. I've got a dog team coming." He walked over to his car to use the radio. Mara stayed by the campsite. She looked at the tent. The open flap seemed like a dark mouth. She had to know. She had to look inside properly. She put on a pair of gloves. She knelt down and crawled into the tent. It was small. The two sleeping bags. The clothes. The glasses. She shone her flashlight into the corners. Nothing. Then the light glinted off something under one of the sleeping bags. She pushed the bag aside. The tent floor was just a ground sheet. But in the middle of the floor, someone had drawn something. It was drawn in black ash from the fire. It was a spiral. A twisting, turning spiral. In the center of the spiral was a small, dark hole. A hole chewed through the ground sheet and into the earth below. It was too small for a person, but something had come up, or gone down. Mara reached out to touch the spiral. The ash felt cold, and then the low hum started again. It was faint inside the tent. It was coming from the hole. She leaned closer. The hum was a little louder. It was not a machine hum. It was a living hum. It was like 1,000 insects humming at once. And under the hum, she heard voices. Very faint. The boy and the girl. The boy whispered, "It's so dark." The girl cried, "I want to go home." Mara jerked back. Her head hit the roof of the tent. The hum stopped. The voices were gone. She scrambled out of the tent, her heart racing. The sheriff was walking back. Sheriff Miller said, "Dog team is an hour out." "What's wrong?" "You're white as a sheet." Mara pointed at the tent. Mara said, "There's a hole in the tent floor." And I heard them. I heard the kids. They're underground. They're under the tent. The sheriff frowned. He walked over to the tent and looked inside. He shone his light around. Sheriff Miller said, "Mara, I don't see any hole. The ground sheet is fine. A little dirty, but fine." Mara crawled back in. She looked where the hole had been. The sheriff was right. The ground sheet was whole. The spiral drawing was gone. There was nothing there. Just dirt. It was like it never existed. Sheriff Miller said, "You're stressed. It's a bad situation. Why don't you go sit in my car? I'll finish up here." Mara didn't argue. She felt dizzy. She walked to the sheriff's car and sat in the passenger seat. She put her head in her hands. What was happening? Was she losing her mind? The sheriff walked around the campsite, taking pictures. He looked in the trees. He was being thorough. Mara watched him. He stopped near the fire ring. He bent down. He was looking at something on the ground. He picked it up. It was small. It fit in his hand. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put it in his pocket. He didn't write it down in his notebook. He just put it away. Mara felt a new chill. That was strange. What did he find? The sheriff walked back to the car. He opened the driver's door and got in. Sheriff Miller said, "Nothing else here. We'll wait for the dogs. They'll find them." He started the car engine. He didn't look at her. He looked straight ahead. Mara saw something on the sleeve of his jacket. Near the cuff. It was a black smudge. Like ash. From the fire pit. Or from a drawn spiral. She didn't say anything. She just watched him. He seemed different. His hands were tight on the steering wheel. The radio crackled. The dispatcher's voice came through. Dispatcher said, "Sheriff, we've got another one. Abandoned campsite. Over at Willow Creek. Same thing. Fire going. Food cooking. No people. Over." The sheriff closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. Sheriff Miller said, "Copy that, dispatch. I'm on my way. Over." He looked at Mara. His eyes were tired, but there was something else in them. A knowing look. Like he had expected this. Sheriff Miller said, "This isn't the first time, Mara. It happens every few years. People vanish. We never find them. We never will." Mara stared at him. Mara said, "What do you mean? You know about this?" The sheriff put the car in drive. He started to pull away from the campsite. Sheriff Miller said, "It's best not to talk about it. It's best to just let it be. The hollow takes what it wants, and then it sleeps for a while." The sheriff's words hung in the air, heavy and final. Mara couldn't believe what she was hearing. He knew. He had always known. Mara said, "You can't be serious. You just let people vanish? We have to do something." Sheriff Miller kept his eyes on the winding road. His face was a stone mask. Sheriff Miller said, "There is nothing to do, Ranger Soto. Nothing that can be done. It is older than these woods. Older than this town. You fight it, you disappear too. I'm taking you back to your truck. Then I'm going to Willow Creek. You will go back to the station. You will forget any voices you heard. You will forget any holes in tents. Do you understand?" Mara was silent. She understood, but she did not agree. She looked out the window. The trees blurred past. They looked like tall, dark sentinels keeping a terrible secret. She thought about the thing he had picked up and put in his pocket. What was it? They reached her truck. The sheriff stopped his car. He finally looked at her. His eyes were pleading. Sheriff Miller said, "Go home, Mara. Please. For your own good." Mara got out without a word. She slammed the car door. The sheriff drove away, leaving her alone with her dead truck. She watched his taillights disappear. She was not going home. She was not forgetting. She walked back to Campsite 8. The sun was lower in the sky now. Long shadows stretched across the ground. The place felt even more wrong than before. The air was colder. She went straight to the tent. She crawled back inside. She ran her gloved hands over the ground sheet where the spiral had been. Nothing. It was just dirty nylon. She lay down, putting her ear to the floor. She listened. Nothing. Just the sound of her own breathing. She was about to give up when she felt a faint vibration, so soft she almost missed it. The hum. It was deep underground. It was there. She sat up. The sheriff had found something. He had picked it up right by the fire ring. She went to the cold ashes. She kicked at them gently with her boot. Something metallic glinted in the fading light. She knelt down and brushed the ashes aside. It was a small, circular piece of metal, like a coin, but it wasn't money. It was etched with a familiar design. A spiral. The same spiral that had been drawn in the tent. One side of the coin was shiny. The other was blackened and rough. She picked it up. It was warm. As soon as her fingers touched it, the humming grew louder in her mind. It wasn't in her ears. It was in her head, and with it came a flood of images. A dark place, cold earth, roots brushing against her face. She was crawling. Something was ahead, a soft, pale light. The humming was all around her. It was beautiful. It promised warmth. It promised home. Mara dropped the coin. The vision stopped. Her heart was hammering. That was what they felt. The kids. They weren't scared. They were called. They were drawn into the earth by that beautiful, terrible sound. She looked at the coin on the ground. It was a token. A key. The sheriff had taken one. He had known what it was. He was part of this. She heard a twig snap behind her. She spun around, grabbing her bear spray. A man stood at the edge of the campsite. He was not the sheriff. He was tall and thin. He wore old, worn-out clothes. His face was kind, but sad. The man said, "You found one. You shouldn't have touched it." Mara aimed the spray at him. Mara said, "Who are you? Stay back." The man didn't move. He held up his hands to show he was not a threat. The man said, "My name is Eli. My daughter, she was taken 10 years ago, at this very campsite. I come here. I look for answers." Mara lowered the spray a little. She saw the pain in his eyes. It was real. Mara said, "The sheriff said to let it be. He said it takes people every few years." Eli nodded slowly. Eli said, "Miller." "Yes. He knows. His brother was taken 20 years ago. He found a token too. He keeps them. He thinks if he collects them, it will stop. But it never does. It just sleeps a little longer. The hunger always returns." Mara looked down at the coin. So that's what the sheriff was doing. He wasn't helping the thing. He was trying to fight it in his own way. A hopeless way. Eli said, "The token, it lets you hear it, see it. But it also calls to them. To the hollow ones. They know you have it." As if on cue, the temperature dropped sharply. The air grew still. The low hum returned, but it was different now. It was not a call. It was a warning. A threat. From the trees around the campsite, figures began to emerge. They were pale and thin. Their limbs were too long. They moved without sound. They were the things from the phone video. The hollow ones. They did not have eyes. Just smooth, blank skin where faces should be. They surrounded the campsite. They were not looking at her. They were looking at the token on the ground. Eli stepped closer to her, his voice urgent. Eli said, "They want it back. They always want them back. You have to give it to them, or they will take you instead." Mara looked at the hollow ones. They started to move closer. Their long, thin fingers reached out. She had a choice. Give them the token, or fight. She thought of the kids underground. She thought of Eli's daughter. She thought of the sheriff's brother. She could not let this continue. Mara said, "No." She bent down and snatched the token from the ground. She held it tight in her fist. It burned her palm. The humming in her head became a deafening roar. The hollow ones let out a soundless cry of rage. They surged forward. Eli grabbed her arm. Eli yelled, "Run!" They ran. They crashed through the trees, away from the campsite. Mara could hear the hollow ones behind them. They did not make sound with their feet, but the forest did. Leaves rustled. Branches broke. They were fast. So fast. Eli led the way. He knew these woods. He pulled her down a steep embankment. They slid into a dry creek bed. He pushed her under a large, rocky overhang. It was a tight space. They hid in the shadows, breathing hard. They listened. They could hear nothing. No footsteps. No rustling. Had they lost them? Mara's hand was throbbing. She opened her fist. The token was glowing with a faint, white light. It was hot. Eli saw it, and his eyes widened in fear. Eli whispered, "It's active. It's calling to the heart of it. We have to get rid of it. Now." But Mara didn't want to get rid of it. She looked at the glowing token. She finally understood. It wasn't a key for them. It was a key for her. It was a way to find where they were taken. The vision she had, the tunnel, the light, she could find it. She could find them. Mara whispered, "I'm not giving it back. I'm going to use it. I'm going to find that hole." Eli stared at her like she was crazy. Eli said, "You can't. No one comes back. It's a one-way path." Mara closed her hand around the token again. The humming filled her body and soul. It was not scary anymore. It was a map. She knew where to go. Mara said, "You can stay here, or you can help me. But I'm going." She crawled out from under the rock. The forest was quiet. The hollow ones were gone. For now. She started walking. She didn't need to see the path. The token pulled her forward. Eli hesitated for a moment, then followed her. He caught up to her side. Eli said, "You're going to get us both killed." Mara didn't answer. She kept walking. The token led her away from the creek, up a hill covered in thick ferns. The sun was almost down. The woods were getting dark. At the top of the hill, an old, gnarled oak tree stood alone. Its roots were like giant snakes breaking through the earth. The token in Mara's hand grew hotter. The pull was strongest here. This was the place. She walked to the base of the tree. There, between two massive roots, was a hole. It was just like the one in her vision. It was dark. It smelled of damp earth and something else. Something sweet. The humming was loudest here. It poured out of the hole. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. It promised answers. It promised an end to the mystery. Eli grabbed her arm. Eli said, "Don't. Please. Look." He pointed at the base of the tree. Carved into the bark were names. Dozens of them. Dates going back 100 years. Some were just initials. It was a record of the taken, the lost. Eli found one name and touched it with a shaking finger. It said Lily, his daughter. Mara looked from his heartbroken face to the dark, inviting hole. The humming swelled, drowning out all her fear. She had to know. She had to see. Mara said, "I'm going in." Eli's face crumpled in despair. He shook his head, but he didn't try to stop her again. He just stepped back, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Mara knelt before the hole. It was small, barely wide enough for her shoulders. The beautiful, terrifying hum poured out of it, wrapping around her like a blanket. She took one last look at the darkening sky, then she pushed herself into the earth. The tunnel was tight and damp. The walls were cool, packed earth and tangled roots. She had to crawl on her hands and knees. The token in her hand glowed brighter, casting a faint white light ahead of her. The humming was all around her now, inside her. It guided her forward. The tunnel sloped downward. It went deep. She lost all sense of time and direction. There was only the tunnel, the hum, and the glow. She thought about turning back, but when she looked behind her, there was only darkness. The way back was gone. She had to keep going. After what felt like an hour, the tunnel began to change. The earthen walls gave way to smooth, dark stone. The air grew colder. The smell of damp earth was replaced by a strange, metallic smell, like old blood and ozone. The tunnel opened up. She crawled out into a large, cavernous space. She stood up. Her legs were shaky. The token's light was not enough to see the whole cavern. It was vast. The ceiling was lost in darkness. The air hummed with a powerful, physical force. She could feel it in her bones. In the center of the cavern, a soft, pale light glowed. It was the source of the hum. It was beautiful and awful. She walked toward it. Her footsteps echoed in the immense space. As she got closer, she saw what the light was. It was a pulsing, organic-looking mass. It was rooted to the cavern floor like a giant, glowing fungus. Veins of light ran through it. It throbbed like a heart. This was the heart of the hollow. This was what called to people. This was what took them. She saw shapes around the base of the pulsing light. People. They were sitting or standing, perfectly still. They were covered in a fine, white web-like substance. It clung to their clothes and skin. Their eyes were open, but they saw nothing. They were trapped in a waking dream. She saw the two teenagers from the campsite. They were there, side by side. Their faces were calm, peaceful. They were alive, but they were not there. She saw a man who looked like an older version of Sheriff Miller. His brother. She saw a little girl with Eli's eyes. Lily. They were all here. Preserved. Fed upon. The hum was not a call. It was a feeding song. A voice spoke behind her. It was the old woman's voice from the woods. But it was not coming from the air. It was coming from the pulsing heart. The voice said, "You see? They are happy here. They are at peace. They feel no pain, no fear, only the song." Mara turned to face the heart. The voice was calm, motherly. Mara said, "Let them go. They don't belong to you." The heart pulsed softly. The light within it swirled. The voice said, "They answered the call. They chose to come. The song is a gift. It fills the empty spaces inside them. The hollow makes them whole." Mara looked at the peaceful, empty faces. They were not whole. They were empty shells. The thing was lying. It was a predator. It lured people in and consumed them. She felt anger push aside her fear. Mara said, "You're a parasite. You steal lives." The voice sighed, a sound that echoed through the whole cavern. The voice said, "I survive, as all things must. The token you hold, it is a piece of me, a piece of my hunger. Give it back. Join the song. Your worry will end." The token in Mara's hand burned hotter. It wanted to return to the heart. It pulled her toward the pulsing light. The peaceful faces of the trapped people watched her. It would be so easy to just let go, to give in, to never feel afraid or lonely again. She took a step forward, then she stopped. She thought of Eli, waiting up above. She thought of the sheriff, collecting tokens in a hopeless battle. She thought of all the families who never got answers. She couldn't give up. She had to fight. Mara said, "No." She clenched the token tight. Instead of moving toward the heart, she turned and ran to the nearest person. It was the boy from the campsite. She started tearing at the white web on his arm. It was strong like steel wool. It cut her fingers. The humming in the cavern changed. The beautiful melody twisted. It became a discordant, angry shriek. The heart of the hollow pulsed violently. The light flared, blindingly bright. The peaceful faces of the trapped people contorted in sudden pain. They began to twitch. The hollow was angry. It was hurting them because of her. She had to stop. The voice screamed in her mind. The voice screamed, "Stop. You hurt them." Mara stepped back, her hands bleeding. She was making it worse. She couldn't free them. The token was burning her hand now. It was a pain she had never felt before. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't free them, but she could maybe stop this from happening again. She had to destroy the heart. She looked at the glowing token in her hand. It was a piece of the heart. Maybe it could hurt it. She ran toward the pulsing mass. The hum was a physical force now, trying to push her back. The trapped people began to writhe, their mouths open in silent screams. She raised the token high above her head. With all her strength, she plunged it into the side of the glowing heart. The effect was instant. The heart let out a silent, psychic wave of agony. The light flickered wildly. The beautiful hum became a deafening screech of static. The cavern shook. Cracks appeared in the floor. The token was absorbed into the heart, which began to convulse. The white webs holding the people dissolved into dust. They collapsed to the ground, free but unconscious. The heart's light started to dim. It was working. She was killing it. But as the heart dimmed, the cavern grew darker. The walls began to groan. Rocks started to fall from the ceiling. She hadn't just killed the heart. She was collapsing the entire cavern. And she was trapped inside with everyone she had tried to save. A large rock crashed down next to her, and the world went black. Mara woke up to pain. Her head throbbed. Her hand felt raw. It was dark. So dark. She could hear nothing. No hum. No beautiful song. Just a ringing silence. And then a groan. Then a cough. Then a child crying. The taken ones were waking up. They were confused. They were scared. They were free. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. It was weak, but it was there. It swept across the cavern. It lit up faces full of confusion and fear. A man's voice yelled, "What is this place? Where are we?" Mara tried to sit up. Dirt and small rocks fell from her. The cavern was unstable. It could collapse completely at any moment. She had to get them out. She had to get everyone out. She stood up, her body aching. Mara yelled, "Everyone, over here. Follow my voice." She used her own flashlight, its beam joining the others. People stumbled toward her. They were weak. They had been still for a long time. She saw the two teenagers holding on to each other. She saw Sheriff Miller's brother, looking around with wide, disoriented eyes. She saw Eli's daughter, Lily, a small girl clutching the shirt of a woman she didn't know. Mara said, "We have to go. Now. The ceiling is coming down." She led them toward the tunnel she had come from. It was still there, a dark hole in the wall. But it was smaller now. The sides were crumbling. One by one, they pushed into the tunnel. Mara went last, helping an older man who could barely walk. The tunnel was even tighter on the way back. They had to crawl. It was slow, painfully slow. Behind them, they heard the cavern groan. A loud crash echoed through the tunnel. A cloud of dust billowed after them. The heart was dying, and it was taking its home with it. They kept crawling. Mara's arms burned. Her knees were scraped raw. She could hear people crying in the dark ahead of her. She kept pushing them forward. After an eternity, she saw a sliver of night sky ahead. Fresh air. They were almost out. The first person crawled out of the hole. Then the next. Mara helped the old man out, then climbed out herself. She collapsed onto the cool grass, gasping. They were on the hill under the old oak tree. The stars were out. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. People were everywhere, sitting on the ground, crying, holding each other. They were free. She had done it. She heard a shout from the trees. Flashlights bobbed toward them. Sheriff Miller and Eli ran into the clearing. They stopped, stunned. They saw all the people. The sheriff saw his brother. His mouth fell open. He ran to him and pulled him into a crushing hug. Eli fell to his knees in front of his daughter. He was crying. He held her like he would never let go. The sheriff walked over to Mara. He helped her to her feet. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, his eyes full of a gratitude too big for words. Ambulances and police cars arrived soon after. The clearing was filled with light and noise. Paramedics checked everyone. The story was too wild to believe, but the evidence was there. Dozens of missing people, found alive on a hilltop. Mara gave a short statement. She said she found them wandering, confused. She didn't mention the tunnel. She didn't mention the heart. No one would believe her. The sheriff backed her up. He knew the truth, but some truths are better left buried. As they loaded the last person into an ambulance, Mara walked back to the old oak tree. The hole was gone. It had collapsed in on itself. There was just a depression in the ground. The humming was gone. The forest was just a forest again. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Eli. His daughter was sleeping in his arms. Eli said, "Thank you. You gave me my world back." Mara just smiled. She was too tired to speak. She went home. She slept for 2 days straight. The news called her a hero. She had found the lost hikers. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired and changed. A week later, she was back at work. She avoided Pine Grove Campground. She didn't think she could ever go back there. She was doing paperwork in her office when her radio crackled. It was dispatch. Dispatcher said, "Ranger Soto? We've got a call." A hiker reported something strange. Over near Black Rock Falls, an abandoned campsite. Food still cooking on a fire. No people around. Over. Mara's blood went cold. Her hand, still bandaged, began to throb. It couldn't be. She had destroyed it. She had killed the heart. Dispatcher said, "Soto? You copy?" Over. Mara picked up the microphone. Her hand was shaking. She knew then. The hollow was not just in one place. It had other hearts. Other hungry mouths. The token she destroyed was just one. The sheriff had a collection of them. It was never over. Mara said, "I copy dispatch. I'm on my way." She put the radio down. She looked out the window at the dark, endless woods. The hollow was still out there, and it was still hungry. She put on her hat and walked out the door. The work was never done. Name of the next story: Tracks That Lead Nowhere. The snow had been falling for 3 days. It was a thick, silent blanket that covered everything. My world was white and quiet. I was alone in the ranger's cabin, deep in the state park. The season was over. No one else was stupid enough to stay. I liked the quiet, or I thought I did. The first morning after the storm passed, I saw them. Footprints. They were enormous. Each print was longer than my boot. They circled the cabin. A perfect circle. My heart beat fast. I looked around. The forest was still. Nothing moved. I tried to tell myself it was a bear, but bears hibernated, and no bear made a track that big. The prints were deep. Whatever made them was heavy. Very heavy. I followed the circle around my home. The steps never went towards the trees. They only went around the cabin. Again and again. It was like something had walked in a tight circle for hours. But I had heard nothing. The snow had muffled all sound. I went back inside. I locked the door. It was a silly thing to do. The door was flimsy. A strong wind could blow it open. But I locked it anyway. I sat by the window all day. I watched the tracks. The sun was bright. It made the snow sparkle. But the tracks looked like black holes in the white. They were a dark mark on my peaceful world. Night came early. The forest got dark quickly. I lit my oil lamp. I tried to read a book, but I could not focus. My ears strained for any sound. There was only the crackle of the fire. Then I heard it, a low crunch. It was the sound of snow compacting under a great weight. Crunch, then silence. Crunch, then silence. It was outside. It was moving slowly. I blew out the lamp. I moved to the window. I peeked through a crack in the blinds. The moon was full. It lit up the snow. I saw nothing. The crunching sound stopped. It was right outside the window. I held my breath. I did not move. I could hear my own heart pounding. Then the crunching started again. It moved away from the window. I let out a shaky breath. I stayed at the window for a long time. I saw nothing, but I heard it, circling, always circling. The next morning, I had to go out. I needed more firewood from the shed. The cold was biting. I put on my heavy coat and boots. I grabbed my axe. I opened the door slowly. I looked out. The circle of footprints was still there. But now there was a second circle outside the first one. The thing had walked another loop in the night. A wider one. It was getting closer. My hands were shaking. I walked quickly to the woodshed. My eyes darted around. The trees were still. The air was cold and dead. I filled my arms with logs. I turned to go back, and I saw it. A single new footprint. It was right in front of the cabin door. It had come close. Very close. I dropped the wood. I ran inside. I slammed the door shut. I locked it. I leaned against it, breathing hard. I was trapped. The radio was dead. The phone line was down. The snow was too deep for my truck. I was alone. Completely alone. Except for the thing outside. I had to see. I had to know. I went to the biggest window. I carefully wiped away the frost. I looked out at the new outer circle of tracks. And then I saw something that made my blood freeze. The tracks, they were changing. The deep, round prints, they were becoming longer, more stretched out. The toes were becoming clearer, and between them was a faint, webbed impression, like the track was made by something with huge, webbed feet. Something that walked on two legs. Something that should not be here. Not in the snow. Not in these woods. This thing was not a bear. It was something else. Something old. And it was outside my door. The day passed in a fog of fear. I did nothing. I just sat. I listened. The circling had stopped. The forest was silent again. But the silence was worse. It felt like it was waiting. I was waiting too. For night to come. I knew it would come back when it got dark. I had an idea. A stupid idea. But it was all I had. I found my old hunting rifle. It was a .30-06. It could stop a moose. I hoped it could stop this. I also found a powerful flashlight. I would wait. When I heard it next, I would flash the light on it. I would see it, and if it charged, I would shoot. The plan made me feel a little better. Not much, but a little. As the sun set, I took my place by the window. I turned off all the lights. I left the fire to die. The cabin got cold. I did not care. I needed to see into the dark. The moon was not as bright tonight. Clouds were moving in. More snow was coming. The world was getting darker. I held the rifle tight. My finger was near the trigger. The flashlight was in my other hand. I waited. Hours went by. Nothing happened. My eyes felt heavy. I was so tired. I had not slept well in 2 days. I started to drift off. My head nodded. A loud crack woke me up. It was the sound of a branch breaking. My heart jumped. I was fully awake now. I listened. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was back. The steps were heavier tonight. Slower. It was taking its time. It was on the far side of the cabin. I could hear it moving through the snow. I raised the flashlight. I pointed it towards the sound. My hand was shaking. I took a deep breath. I waited for it to come around the corner. The steps got closer, closer. I could see a shadow moving against the trees. It was big, very big. This was it. I squeezed the flashlight. I pushed the button. The bright beam cut through the night. It lit up the thing outside my window. The creature was tall, at least 8 feet tall. Its skin was pale, almost gray. It was slick and wet, like it was covered in slime. Water dripped from its long arms. Its hands ended in thick claws, but its feet were huge. They were flat and splayed, with long toes connected by a thick, rubbery web. They were the feet I had seen in the snow. It turned its head towards the light. Its face was the most horrible thing I had ever seen. It had no nose, just 2 slits. Its mouth was wide, with no lips. It was full of sharp, needle-like teeth. And its eyes, they were large and black. They reflected the light like an animal's. They held no emotion, no anger, no hunger, just a deep, empty blackness. It stared right at me. It did not blink. It did not flinch from the light. It just stopped and stared. I was frozen. I could not move. I could not breathe. I dropped the flashlight. It hit the floor and went out. The world went dark again. I heard a low sound from outside. It was a deep, gurgling noise, like water bubbling from a deep hole. It was laughing. The thing was laughing at me. Then the crunching started again. It was walking away. I slumped against the wall. I was crying. I was terrified. I had seen it, and it had seen me. The rest of the night was quiet. The thing did not come back, or if it did, I did not hear it. I sat in the dark until the sun came up. The gray morning light showed a new horror. The tracks were different. The 2 circles were still there, but now a single line of prints led from the outer circle right up to my front door. They stopped there, and then they led away again. It had come to my door. It had stood there. For how long? I did not know. I looked at the door, and I saw something else. Something wet was on the handle. It was a thick, clear slime. It dripped slowly onto the floor. I felt sick. It had touched my door. It had tried to get in. I knew I could not stay. I would freeze to death out there, but I would rather freeze than let that thing get me. I started to pack a bag. Some food. water, matches, the rifle. I put on every layer of clothing I had. I was so scared my teeth were chattering. I opened the door slowly. The cold air hit my face. I looked out. The tracks were everywhere, but the forest was empty. I took a step outside, then another. I started to walk. I headed for the main road. It was 10 miles away, in deep snow that would take all day. I walked as fast as I could. I did not look back. I was too afraid to look back. After an hour, I had to stop. I was tired. I leaned against a tree to rest. I looked behind me. I could see my tracks in the snow. And I saw something else. Another set of tracks. They were the big, webbed footprints. They were following my path exactly. It was behind me. It was following me. I started to run. I ran through the snow. It was hard. My legs burned. I could hear my own breath, loud and ragged. I did not hear it behind me. I risked another look back. The tracks were still there. It was still following, but I could not see it. Where was it? Why couldn't I see it? I kept running. I came to a frozen stream. The ice looked thick. I had to cross it. It was the fastest way. I stepped onto the ice. It held my weight. I started to cross. I was halfway across when I heard it. A deep crack. The ice was breaking. I fell through. The water was freezing. It was so cold it felt like fire. I gasped for air. I grabbed at the edge of the ice. It broke off in my hand. I was sinking. My heavy clothes pulled me down. I was going to drown. Then I felt something grab my arm. It was strong. It pulled me out of the water. It threw me onto the solid ice on the other side of the stream. I coughed up water. I was shaking from the cold. I looked up to see who had saved me. It was the creature. It stood over me. Water streamed from its pale skin. It smelled like a muddy riverbed. It looked down at me with those black eyes. It made that low, gurgling sound again. It was not laughing now. It sounded almost curious. It took a step closer. I scrambled backwards on the ice. I reached for my rifle. It was gone. It must have fallen in the water. I was defenseless. The creature tilted its head. It pointed a long, clawed finger at me. Then it pointed back towards the cabin. It wanted me to go back. It did not want me to leave. It was hurting me, like I was its animal. I got to my feet. I was so cold. I had no choice. I turned around. I started walking back towards the cabin. I heard the creature behind me. It was following. It was taking me home. I reached the cabin just as the sun was setting. I was freezing. My clothes were stiff with ice. I went inside. I did not lock the door. What was the point? I started a fire. I had to get warm. I sat in front of the flames. I heard the crunching outside start again. The circle was beginning once more. I was its prisoner. This cabin was my cage. The creature was the keeper. I put my head in my hands. I had never felt so alone. The fire crackled. The wind blew. And under it all, I heard a new sound. A soft, wet scraping. It was at the window. I did not look. I knew what it was. It was watching me. It was always watching. The scraping continued. It was trying to get my attention. I finally looked up. There was a face at the window. It was the creature. Its black eyes were fixed on me. It raised one clawed hand. It pressed it against the glass. A clear, slimy residue was left behind. Then it did something strange. It moved its hand down, leaving a trail of slime. Then it moved its fingers. It was drawing something. A symbol. It was a simple shape. It looked like 3 waves, one on top of the other. I did not know what it meant. The creature tapped the glass under the symbol. It wanted me to understand. It wanted something from me. But what? I just stared. The creature's expression did not change. But it tapped the glass again, harder this time. Then it moved away from the window. The symbol slowly began to drip down the glass. I was more confused than ever. What did it want? Why was it keeping me here? The circling started again. The crunch, crunch, crunch of its massive webbed feet in the snow. It was a sound that was driving me mad. I had to do something. I could not just sit here. I looked around the cabin for anything that could help me. My eyes landed on an old bookshelf. It was full of park manuals and old logbooks. Maybe there was something there. I started pulling books off the shelf. I flipped through them quickly. Most were boring records of weather and wildlife. Then I found an old leather-bound journal. It belonged to a ranger from 50 years ago. His name was Elias. I started reading. The entries were normal at first. Then I found one that made my heart stop. Elias wrote, January 17th. Another trapper gone missing. Old man Higgins. They found his shack empty. But they found tracks in the snow. Huge tracks. Like a man's, but not. With a webbing between the toes. The locals won't talk about it. They call it the stream walker. They say it's an old spirit of the river. It gets angry when the streams are polluted. It takes people. It keeps them. It drowns them on dry land. I dropped the journal. My hands were shaking. The stream walker. That was what was outside. It thought I had done something wrong. It thought I had polluted its water. But I hadn't. I loved these woods. I protected them. I ran to the window. I wiped away the condensation. The creature was on the other side of the clearing. It was just standing there watching the cabin. I opened the window a crack. The cold air rushed in. I shouted into the night. I didn't do anything. I take care of this place. Please. The creature turned its head slowly. It looked at me. It started walking towards the cabin. It moved with a purpose. It stopped right below my window. It looked up at me. It raised its arm and pointed at me. Then it pointed to the ground. It wanted me to come outside. This was it. It was calling me out. I was so scared. But I had to try. I had to make it understand. I closed the window. I took a deep breath. I walked to the door. My hand was on the knob. I could hear my blood pounding in my ears. I opened the door. The creature was standing about 20 feet away. It was even bigger up close. Water dripped from its body and steamed in the cold air. It just stared at me. I took a small step forward. My legs felt like jelly. I said, I am not your enemy. I protect the forest. The creature made a low, gurgling sound. It took a step closer. I forced myself to stand still. It pointed a claw at me again. Then it pointed to the symbol it had drawn on the window. I said, I don't understand. What does that mean? The creature suddenly let out a harsh, grating noise. It sounded frustrated. It turned and walked towards the trees. It stopped and looked back at me. It wanted me to follow. I didn't want to, but I had to know. I followed it into the woods. We walked for maybe 10 minutes. The creature moved silently through the snow. I struggled to keep up. Finally, we stopped in a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a frozen stream. The creature pointed at the ice. I walked closer. I looked down. Under the clear ice, I could see something. It was a pile of rusted metal cans, old paint cans, and bags of garbage. Someone had dumped their trash in this stream. They had polluted the water. The creature was right to be angry. But it wasn't me. I said, I didn't do this. I would never do this. The creature looked from the trash to me. Its black eyes seemed to search my face. It made a softer sound, like flowing water. It seemed to believe me. Then it pointed back towards the cabin. It wanted to go back. We walked back in silence. I didn't feel as scared anymore. I felt confused, but not scared. When we got to the cabin, the creature stopped. It looked at me. It pointed to the symbol on the window. Then it pointed to the woods where the trash was. Then it pointed at me. I understood. It wanted me to clean it up. It was my job. I was the ranger. I nodded my head. I said, I will. I promise. When the snow melts, I will clean it all up. The creature stared at me for a long time. Then it slowly nodded its head. It turned and walked towards the trees. It disappeared into the dark forest. I stood there for a long time, watching the place where it had vanished. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was shining. I looked outside. The snow was still there, but the footprints were gone. Every single one. It was like the creature had never been here. The only thing that remained was the slimy symbol on my window. I knew it was real. I knew what I had to do. I waited for the spring. The day the snow melted enough, I went back to that clearing. I brought bags and tools. I spent the whole day pulling trash out of the stream. I cleaned it all. I took the trash away. I felt good. I had kept my promise. That night I was in my cabin. I was reading by the fire. I heard a sound outside, a soft crunch in the wet snow. My heart jumped. I went to the window. I looked out. There, on the edge of the trees, stood the creature. It was watching me. It did not move. It did not come closer. It just watched. Then it raised one long arm. It gave me a slow wave. It was a strange, awkward movement. Then it turned and melted back into the forest. I never saw it again. But sometimes on quiet nights, I hear a sound. It is a soft, gurgling sound, like a stream flowing over rocks. It does not scare me anymore. It is just a reminder that I am not alone, and that I must keep my promise. Always. The winter that followed was the longest of my life. The silence was different now. It was not an empty silence. It was a waiting silence. I found myself listening for it, not for the crunch of its steps, but for the gentle gurgle of water that sometimes seemed to drift in on the wind. I kept my promise. I patrolled the streams and rivers with a new purpose. I cleaned up any trash I found. I even found a few other old dumping sites. I cleaned them all. I felt like I was being watched, but it did not feel like a bad thing. Not anymore. Spring finally came. The snow melted. The world turned green again. The streams were full and loud with runoff. I was checking a trail near the northern boundary. I came around a bend and stopped. There, in the mud next to a rushing creek, was a single footprint. It was enormous. It was webbed. It was fresh. My breath caught in my throat. It was still here. It was still around. I looked around quickly. I saw nothing. But I felt it. I knew it was close. I did not run. I just stood there. I said quietly, "Hello? Are you there?" There was no answer. Just the sound of the water. I continued my patrol. I felt its presence for the rest of the day. It was following me, but it kept its distance. A week later, something strange happened. I was hiking a remote trail. I saw a man ahead of me. He was not on the trail. He was digging a hole next to a stream. I shouted, "Hey, what are you doing?" The man jumped. He turned around. He looked guilty. He had a box in his hands. It was full of old motor oil containers. He was about to dump them. I was angry. I started walking towards him. I said, "You can't dump that here. This is a protected area." The man was big. He looked mean. He said, "Who's gonna stop me?" "You." He took a step towards me. I was ready for a fight, but then a sound came from the woods. It was a deep, low groan. It was the sound of bending trees. The man froze. His eyes went wide. He looked past me into the forest. His face turned white. He dropped the box. The containers spilled everywhere. He whispered, "What was that?" I did not turn around. I knew what it was. I said, "The forest doesn't like polluters. You should leave. Now." The man did not need to be told twice. He turned and ran. He crashed through the bushes and was gone. I heard another sound behind me. A soft, approving gurgle. Then silence. I cleaned up the spilled containers myself. I knew I had a partner now. A silent partner. The summers are busy here. Lots of hikers and campers. I usually hate it, but this year was different. I felt calm. I knew I was not alone in protecting this place. One day, a group of teenagers was being loud and messy. They were leaving trash all over their campsite. I wanted to talk to them. They were rude. They laughed at me. They said they would clean it up later. I knew they wouldn't. I walked away. I was frustrated. That night, a huge storm rolled in. The wind howled. The rain fell hard. I was in my cabin. I thought about those kids in their flimsy tents. I heard a knock on my door. It was late. No one should be out there. I opened the door. There was no one there. But on my doorstep was a pile of wet, muddy trash. It was the trash from the teenagers' campsite. I looked out into the storm. I saw a tall, dark shape moving away into the trees. Water flowed off its broad back. It had cleaned up the mess, and it had returned it to me, like a dog bringing a ball back to its owner. I almost laughed. I brought the trash inside. The next morning, the teenagers came to my cabin. They were soaked and terrified. They said something had walked through their camp in the night. Something huge. It had torn down their tents. It had thrown their trash around. It had stared at them with black eyes. They were leaving the park immediately. They apologized for the mess. I just nodded. I said, "The woods don't forget." They left in a hurry. I have gotten used to it now. My strange neighbor. My guardian of the streams. I leave offerings sometimes. I find pretty stones from the riverbed and leave them on a stump near where I first saw it. The stones are always gone the next day. Once I caught a large trout. I left it on the same stump. In the morning it was gone. Only a few clean bones remained. I think it appreciated the gift. We have an understanding. I protect its water. It protects me. It is a good deal. But last night something changed. The weather turned cold again. An early frost. I was sleeping when a sound woke me. It was the sound of my cabin door creaking open. I sat up in bed. My heart was pounding. It stood in my doorway. It was the first time it had ever come inside. Water dripped from its body onto my floor. It did not move. It just stood there. Its black eyes looked at me. It seemed agitated. It made an urgent gurgling sound. It pointed outside. Then it turned and left. I got out of bed. I put on my boots and coat. I followed it outside. The night was freezing. The creature was waiting for me. It started walking into the woods. I followed. It led me deep into the forest, to a place I had never been before. We came to a small, still pond. The creature stopped. It pointed at the water. The surface of the pond was covered in a strange, green slime. It smelled bad, like chemicals. The creature made a sad, whimpering sound. It looked at me. It pointed at the slime. Then it pointed at me. It wanted me to fix this. But this was different from trash. This was a sickness in the water. I did not know how to fix it. I said, "I don't know what to do. This is bad." The creature tilted its head. It stepped into the pond. The water came up to its waist. It bent down and put its hands in the slime. It shuddered. It was clearly in pain. This pollution hurt it. It looked back at me. Its eyes seemed to plead with me. It needed my help. I had to find the source. I had to stop it. For both of us. I spent the next day investigating. I followed the stream that fed the pond. I walked for miles. Finally, I found it. An old, broken pipe was hidden in the bushes. It was coming from outside the park boundaries. It was leaking a nasty-looking fluid into the water. This was the source. I took pictures. I took notes. I reported it to the state environmental agency. They said they would look into it. But they are slow. Bureaucracy is slow. I went back to the pond that night. The creature was there. It was waiting. I tried to explain. I said, "I found the problem. I told the government. They will fix it. But it will take time." The creature listened. It looked at the polluted pond. It looked back at me. It did not seem to understand time. It needed the water clean now. It let out a low, sad moan. It sank deeper into the pond, almost like it was trying to cleanse the water with its own body. It was a hopeless gesture. I felt a deep sadness for it. This was its home, and it was being poisoned. 2 days later, the state people finally came. They looked at the pipe. They took samples. They said it was from an old factory miles away. They said it would be a big job to stop it. It might take weeks. I thought of the creature, sitting in that sick pond. I couldn't wait weeks. That night, I had an idea. It was a crazy idea. I went to my tool shed. I found a heavy wrench and a big plug. I walked through the night to the broken pipe. I didn't have the authority to do this. But I didn't care. I worked for a different authority now. I used the wrench to tighten a valve. Then I hammered the plug into the pipe. The leak slowed to a drip. It was not a perfect fix, but it was a start. I was covered in grime and chemical-smelling water. I was exhausted. I sat down on the ground. I said to the forest, "I did it. I stopped it." I heard a movement in the trees. The creature stepped out. It looked at the pipe. It looked at me. It walked to the stream. It put its hand in the water. The water was still dirty. But it was not getting worse. The creature made a soft, bubbling sound. It came over to me. It stood over me. It reached out one of its large, wet hands. It gently touched the top of my head. Its touch was cold, but not unpleasant. It was a thank you. Then it turned and walked back into the darkness. I sat there for a long time. I knew our bond was stronger than ever. We were partners. We were friends. This is my life now. I am the ranger. And I have a secret. I am not alone in these woods. And I am glad. The next morning, I went back to the pond. I had to see if my fix worked. The green slime was still there, but it looked less thick. The bad smell was not as strong. I saw the creature standing in the center of the pond. Its eyes were closed. It was very still. I was worried. I called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" Slowly, its eyes opened. They looked at me. It made a soft, flowing sound. It seemed weaker, but it was alive. It pointed a claw at the water around it. Then it pointed up at the sun. I understood. It needed time. The clean water and the sun would help heal the pond. I came back every day after that. I brought my tools. I worked to clean the edges of the pond. I pulled out slime with a net. The creature watched me. It never came too close, but it was always there. After a week, the state people came back with a proper crew. They fixed the pipe for good. They cleaned the water. They thanked me for my help. I did not tell them about my nightly visits, or my silent helper. The pond became clean again. The water was clear. The creature seemed happier. It would sometimes swim in the pond. It moved gracefully in the water. It belonged there. One evening, I was sitting by the clean pond. The creature was on the other side. It was the first time we were together without a problem to solve. It felt peaceful. I spoke to it. I knew it could understand me. I said, "Thank you. For everything. For scaring those kids. For helping me." The creature looked at me. It made a sound like a gentle river current. It lifted a webbed hand and pointed at me. Then it pointed at its own chest. It was saying we were the same. We both cared for this place. A feeling of great peace came over me. I was no longer lonely. But the world outside the park was changing. More people were moving near the borders. New houses were being built. I started to see more trash, more noise, more problems. The creature felt it too. It became more nervous. I would see its tracks in muddy areas more often. They were closer to the trails. It was patrolling more. One afternoon, I found a dead deer near a stream. It had not been killed by an animal. It had been shot by a hunter. Hunting was not allowed in this part of the park. The creature was standing over the deer. It was very upset. It was making a low, angry humming noise. It looked at me. Its black eyes were hard. It pointed at the dead animal. Then it pointed deep into the woods. It wanted me to find the hunter. I said, "I will find them. I will make them leave." I followed the hunter's tracks. I found 2 men with rifles. I gave them a large fine. I made them leave the park. They were angry. They said they would be back. I had a bad feeling. A few days later, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I was on a hill, looking through my binoculars. I saw the 2 hunters again. They were not hunting. They were looking for something. They were following tracks. Huge, webbed tracks in the mud. They had found the creature's trail. One of them pointed. He looked excited. They thought they had found a new animal. A monster to hunt. I had to stop them. I ran down the hill. I shouted at them to leave. They just laughed. The bigger one said, "We're not breaking any laws, Ranger. Just hiking. And we're onto something big." I could not tell them the truth. They would never believe me. Or worse, they would believe me and want to hunt it more. I had to warn the creature. I left the men and ran into the forest. I went to the pond. The creature was not there. I went to all its usual places. I could not find it. I was getting scared. The hunters were getting closer to its territory. That night, I heard a gunshot. It was a single loud crack that echoed through the trees. It came from near the pond. My heart stopped. I grabbed my rifle and ran towards the sound. I did not know what I would find. I hoped the creature was okay. I hoped the hunters were gone. When I got to the pond, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The moon was bright. I saw a figure lying on the ground near the water. It was one of the hunters. He was not moving. I ran to him. He was alive but unconscious. There was a large bump on his head. His rifle was broken in half next to him. The other hunter was nowhere to be seen. Then I heard a whimper. I looked up. The second hunter was backed against a tree. The creature was standing over him. It was not touching him. It was just staring at him with those endless black eyes. The hunter was crying. He was terrified. The creature saw me. It made a short, sharp gurgle. It pointed at the hunter on the ground. Then it pointed at the one against the tree. It was telling me what happened. I said to the hunter, "What did you do?" The hunter sobbed. "It came out of the water. We shot at it. It didn't stop. It just kept coming. It broke Jim's gun. It didn't even touch him." The creature had defended itself. But it had not hurt them badly. It had just scared them. It wanted me to deal with them now. I radioed for help. Other rangers came and took the two men away. They would be banned from the park for life. The men babbled about a monster. No one believed them. They thought it was a bear. After everyone left, I stayed by the pond. The creature emerged from the water. It came and stood next to me. We looked at the broken rifle on the ground. The creature made a sad sound. It did not like violence, but it would protect its home. It would protect me. I knew then that our peace was fragile. The outside world was getting closer. It was only a matter of time before someone else came. Someone who would not give up so easily. The creature looked at me. It seemed to know what I was thinking. It pointed to the deepest, most remote part of the forest. It pointed at itself. Then it pointed at the park entrance. It pointed at me. It was saying that its world was shrinking. My world was changing. We stood there together for a long time, watching the moon reflect on the clean, calm water of the pond. The seasons turned. Another winter came. The snow fell deep and quiet. I was not afraid of the cold or the dark anymore. I had my friend. I knew it was out there, walking its rounds. I would often find its tracks in the morning. A single, large circle around the cabin. It was not a threat. It was a greeting. A way of saying, "I am here." Sometimes, on the coldest nights, I would leave a fish outside my door. It would always be gone by sunrise. Once, I left a warm blanket on the stump. I thought it might be cold. The next day, the blanket was folded neatly on my doorstep. It was damp. It seems it did not need my blankets. The trouble with the hunters made the local news. A small story about two men who got lost and hurt in the park. They told wild stories about a creature. Most people laughed, but some people did not laugh. Some people got interested. I started to see new faces in the park. Men with cameras. Men with sound equipment. They were looking for the state park monster. They called it that. It made me angry. They were trespassing in its home. I did my best to run them off. I gave out tickets, but they kept coming. The creature knew. It became more hidden, more careful. Its tracks disappeared from the easy trails. I missed seeing its signs. I felt like I was losing my friend. One man was more stubborn than the others. His name was Carl. He was a famous monster hunter from a TV show. He had a big truck and a lot of gear. He set up cameras all over the park. He tried to bait the creature. He left out piles of raw meat. It made me sick. I told him to leave. He just smiled and showed me a permit. He said he was doing scientific research. I could not stop him. I went to the creature's pond. I whispered into the trees, "Don't come out. It's a trap. Please stay hidden." I didn't know if it could hear me. I didn't know if it understood. For a week, nothing happened. Carl was getting frustrated. His cameras saw nothing. His bait was untouched. He started to range deeper into the park, into places where people should not go. He found the pond. He found the creature's home. He set up his best camera there. He hid it in a tree. He was sure he would get his proof. That night, a terrible storm hit. The wind screamed. The rain was like bullets. I was in my cabin worrying. I knew the creature loved the water. It might be out in the storm. I hoped it was safe. The next morning, the storm was over. I went to check on Carl's camp. It was destroyed. His tent was ripped to shreds. His equipment was smashed. Water was poured over everything. Carl was sitting on a wet log. He looked shocked. His expensive camera was broken at his feet. I asked him what happened. He said, "It was here. The storm was loud. I didn't hear it come. It was just there. It looked at me. It picked up my camera. It crushed it. Then it picked up a bucket of water and poured it over my generator. It didn't make a sound. It just destroyed everything. Then it left." Carl was not excited. He was scared. He packed what was left of his gear and left that day. He never came back. The creature had protected itself. It had been smart. It used the storm for cover. It knew what the camera was. It knew to break it. I felt relieved. I went to the pond to thank it, but the creature was not there. I waited for hours. It did not come. I came back the next day, and the next. It was gone. The pond was empty. The forest felt empty. I started to panic. Had it left for good? Had Carl scared it away? I searched for days. I looked for tracks. I looked for any sign. I found nothing. I was heartbroken. I had lost my only friend. The winter felt colder and lonelier than ever before. Then one night, I heard a familiar sound. A soft crunch in the snow. Right outside my cabin. My heart leaped. I ran to the door and threw it open. There it was. It was standing there. It looked the same, but in its hand it held something. It was a small dead tree. The tree was covered in the same green slime from the poisoned pond. The creature held it out to me. Its eyes were serious. It pointed at the tree. Then it pointed north, far into the untouched wilderness. Then it pointed at itself. I understood. The sickness was back, but not here. Somewhere else. Somewhere new. It had not been gone. It had been traveling. It had found another polluted place. It needed my help again. It was not saying goodbye. It was asking me to come with it. I looked at my cabin. I looked at the park I was supposed to guard. Then I looked at my friend. It needed me. I nodded. I said, "Okay, I will come. Let me get my things." The creature made a low, happy gurgle. It waited patiently outside. I packed a big bag. Food, water, a knife, warm clothes. I was leaving my post. I was breaking the rules. But I didn't care. This was more important. This was my real job now. I walked outside and closed the cabin door. The creature turned and started walking north. I followed it. We walked away from the known trails. We walked into the deep, dark woods. The snow began to fall again, covering our tracks behind us. We were going on a journey together. The ranger and the river spirit, off to heal a wounded part of the world. I did not know what we would find, but I was not afraid. I was with my friend, and that was all that mattered. The trees closed in behind us, and the world I knew was gone. The deeper we went, the more the world changed. The trees grew taller and closer together. The light became a dim, green gloom. The creature moved with a purpose I had never seen before. It was not its usual slow, patient walk. It was urgent. The slime on the branch was a sickness it felt in its own blood. We walked for hours. My legs ached, but I did not complain. We stopped by a small, frozen stream to drink. The creature did not drink. It just stood in the water, letting it flow over its feet. It seemed to draw strength from it. It looked at me with its dark eyes and made a soft, questioning sound. I nodded. "I'm okay," I said. "Let's keep going." It seemed to understand. We walked until it was almost dark. The forest was utterly silent. No birds. No wind. Then I smelled it. A sharp, chemical smell. It was the same smell from the poisoned pond. The creature stopped. It pointed ahead through the trees. I could see a strange, orange glow. It was not a natural light. We moved forward carefully. We came to the edge of a clearing. What I saw made me feel sick. There was a huge, rusty metal drum lying on its side. Thick, black goo was leaking out of it. The goo had spilled into a small stream. The stream was dead. The plants around it were brown and slimy. The orange glow was from a strange fungus growing on the goo. It was the most horrible thing I had ever seen. The creature let out a deep, mournful groan. It was a sound of pure pain. This was why it had brought me here. I knew what to do. I had learned from the last time. I said, "We need to stop the leak first." I looked at the drum. A big crack was splitting its side. The goo was oozing out. I needed something to plug it. I looked in my bag. I had a roll of duct tape and a rag. It was not much. I said to the creature, "I need something big. A rock. A piece of wood." The creature looked around. It went to a fallen tree. It broke off a large, thick branch with its powerful hands. It brought the branch to me. I wrapped the rag around one end. I pushed it into the crack in the drum. It was hard. The goo was sticky and smelled terrible. The creature watched me. It made an anxious sound. I used the entire roll of duct tape to hold the branch in place. The leak slowed to a drip. It was not perfect, but it was a start. I turned to the creature. "I stopped it for now, but we need to tell someone. This is too big for us." The creature stared at the poisoned stream. It seemed sad. It did not understand telling someone. It only understood fixing. Suddenly we heard voices. Men's voices. They were coming closer. The creature immediately moved in front of me, its large body shielding me. Two men walked into the clearing. They wore dirty overalls and had mean faces. They saw the drum. They saw me. One of them shouted, "Hey, what are you doing to our drum?" I stood up. I said, "This is your drum? You can't dump this here. It's poisoning everything." The men laughed. The bigger one said, "It's our land. We can do what we want. Now get lost, old man." The creature was hidden in the shadows behind me. The men had not seen it yet. I said, "This is not your land. This is state forest. I'm a park ranger. You're under arrest." This was a lie. We were far outside my park, but they didn't know that. The men stopped laughing. The big one stepped forward. He pulled out a knife. He said, "You're not arresting anybody." I was scared. I reached for my own knife. But then, the creature stepped out from behind me. It rose to its full height. Water dripped from its pale skin. It made a low, grating growl that vibrated in my chest. The two men froze. Their eyes went wide with terror. The man with the knife dropped it. He whispered, What is that?" The creature took a step forward. It pointed a long claw at the drum. Then it pointed at the men. Then it pointed away into the woods. Its meaning was clear. Take your poison and leave. The men did not need to be told twice. They turned and ran. They crashed through the bushes and were gone. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The creature looked at me. It made a sound that was almost like a sigh. It was tired of scaring people. It just wanted the water to be clean. We worked for the rest of the day. We could not move the big drum, but we dug a trench around it with our hands and sticks. We lined the trench with rocks. We tried to keep the goo from spreading further. It was hard, dirty work. The creature did not seem to mind the goo. It worked tirelessly. As the sun began to set, we had done all we could. The immediate danger was over. The creature walked to the polluted stream. It knelt down and put its hands in the toxic water. It shuddered, but it did not pull away. It closed its eyes. It seemed to be concentrating. I watched, amazed. Slowly, very slowly, the black color around its hands began to fade. The water became a little clearer. It was using its own body to clean the water. It was hurting itself to heal the stream. After a few minutes, it stood up. It was trembling. It was weaker. It looked at me and nodded. It had done what it could. Now we had to wait. We made a camp nearby. I built a small fire. The creature sat across the fire from me. It did not like the heat, but it did not move away. We sat in silence. We had fought the sickness together. We were both exhausted. I knew this would not be the last time. There would always be more drums, more careless men. But as long as I lived, I would be here to help. I looked at my strange friend. Its black eyes reflected the firelight. I knew then that I would follow it anywhere. This was my life now, and I was finally at peace. We stayed by the poisoned stream for 3 days. Each day, the creature would go to the water and put its hands in. Each time, the water became a little clearer. Each time, the creature became a little weaker. I tried to help. I brought it fish. I tried to get it to rest. but it was determined. This was its purpose. On the morning of the fourth day, I woke up and the creature was gone. The fire was out. I felt a panic rise in my chest. Had it left? Had it become too sick? I stood up and looked around. Then I saw it. It was standing in the center of the stream. The water was now almost clear. The black goo was gone. The creature looked at me. It raised one hand in a slow wave. Then it did something I had never seen before. It leaned back and fell into the water. It did not make a splash. It seemed to melt into the current. It was just gone. I waited by the stream all day. It did not return. I knew what I had to do. I hiked back to the real world. I found a phone. I called the state environmental agency. I told them about the drum. I did not tell them about my friend. They sent a team. They cleaned up the mess. They said it was a good thing I found it. I went back to my cabin in the state park. Everything was the same, but I was different. I was alone again, but I was not lonely. I knew my friend was out there, healing other places. I continued my work. I patrolled the streams. I picked up trash. I always left a fish on the stump by the pond. It was always gone in the morning. Years have passed. I am an old man now. My hair is white. My bones ache. But I still walk these woods. I still listen for the sound of water gurgling over rocks. Sometimes I see a single, large footprint in the mud near a clean stream. I smile. I know he is still watching, still protecting. Last night, I had a dream. I was standing by the pond. The creature was there. He looked strong and healthy. The water around him was crystal clear. He looked at me and nodded. It was a thank you, a goodbye. I woke up feeling calm. I knew my time here was ending, but his time was forever. The snow is falling again outside my window. It covers the world in a blanket of white. It hides all the tracks, but I know what is out there. The tracks are there. They circle. They protect. They lead nowhere and everywhere. They are the tracks of a friend, and I am no longer afraid of the dark. And that's the end of tonight's stories. Keep listening to the sound of rain and fall into a deep, peaceful sleep. Sweet dreams.